Hello, everyone. I'm Michael McNutt, VP of Education and Marketing for WEDI, and welcome to a WEDI Spotlight, Future-Proofing Healthcare, Tackling Cybersecurity Challenges in a Digital Age. Before we begin, a couple of words about WEDI. Our role, convener, collaborator, educator, and influencer. Formed in 1991 by then Secretary of U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Lewis Sullivan. We are named in HIPAA legislation as an advisor to Secretary of HHS, and we maintain that relationship to this day. We have productive working relationships with ASTPONC, CMS, and OCR. We're a multi-stakeholder membership. Plans, providers, vendors, SDOs, state, federal government, and patient advocate organizations are our members. And 17 health IT focused work groups, and we'll get into that shortly. Today's agenda, of course, we're having the welcome right now. After that, we welcome Elliot Jones, CISO and VP at Kaiser Permanente as our opening speaker. Then Dr. Adrian Mayers, VP and CISO at Premera Blue Cross. Following that, a panel moderated by Leslie Berkeheiser and Tanten Nguyen, our co-chairs for the Privacy and Security Work Group, featuring Lee Barrett from Direct Trust, David Pike with FAST, and Louis Moss with FAST and EMR Direct. And then finally, a discussion on the OCR Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, featuring Leslie Tantien and our VP of Federal Affairs, Robert Tennant. As with most of our WEDI events, asking questions or comments is done non-verbally. Please do so using the chat feature. And additionally, slides and recordings will be emailed post-event. I mentioned briefly our work groups, 17 different work groups and task groups focusing on various levels of health IT. If you're ever interested, as a WEDI member, you can access and join any of these work groups by contacting Ariana Poole at apool@wedi.org. That information will be on the chat as well. And speaking of our work groups, our privacy and security work group has been a mainstay and a valuable and visible fixture in terms of our planning, our education, and overall structure here at WEDI. It's my pleasure to introduce Leslie Berkeheiser with Direct Trust and Tanten Nguyen with Kaiser Permanente to offer more information about the work group.
Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. I'm Leslie Tantien. Would you like to go first and talk a little bit about what we're doing? And I'll be happy to back you up on this.
Yes. Welcome, everyone. We really would like to invite you, anyone who is not already joined, to be a part of the WEDI Privacy and Security Work Group, to join us, because we pretty much, I don't want to say the word tackle, but we focus on issues of the day, highlighting concerns about security in our healthcare sector. We track and we monitor regulations and legislations and policies and standards being discussed at the federal level and some often at the state level as well, that might impact the delivery of healthcare with respect to, again, cybersecurity concern and privacy concerns. And as you can imagine, with a new administration coming in, sort of putting a freeze on regulation and a lot of executive orders coming out, that makes for very interesting discussion. So, our group meets every second Wednesday of the month, and we work collectively on developing an agenda that capture highlights of recent events and activities, and to engage the industry on upcoming work that we will be doing. So it's always my pleasure to be working with Leslie. I tell you, every time that Leslie speaks, I learn something new. So it's a lot of work. It's highly complex stuff that we tackle, but it's also fun.
Thanks, Tantien. The other thing I think for people to know is we're trying really hard to make this a safe place for everyone to discuss their thoughts and concerns and issues. You know, WEDI initially was named in the HIPAA regulations as a convener, as Michael went over. And we're really trying to make sure that in this now interoperable world, or at least we're trying to get there, that there's an opportunity to try to understand what's happening around us. And we need to have those discussions where we can all feel safe talking about what we think is happening and what we think it's going to impact in which area, and how we can take kind of a census, if you will, across us and do things that are practical to help our industry. So again, thank you, and please do consider to continue to join us, and we're glad you're supporting us today. Michael, back to you.
Thank you, Leslie. And now it's my pleasure to hand it back off to Tantien, who will introduce our opening speaker.
Right. So once again, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker for this WEDI Cybersecurity Spotlight. He is none other than Kaiser Permanente's very own Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer, our CISO, Mr. Elliot Jones. In this capacity, Elliot leads Kaiser's national cybersecurity vision in key areas, including cyber strategy, resiliency, defense, and incident response. With over 20 years in cybersecurity, including 7 years in healthcare, Elliot has specialized in leading large organizations by developing security strategies, establishing and enforcing governance, overseeing cybersecurity operations, and coordinating security adoption during acquisitions. In fact, Elliot was part of the leadership team shepherding Kaiser through the Change Healthcare ransomware attack that impacted healthcare delivery nationwide just a year ago. My goodness, it's already been a year. Prior to joining Kaiser Permanente, Elliot served as a CISO for both the Keck Medicine of University of Southern California, USC, in Los Angeles, and the Rady Children's Hospital in San Diego. He has also supported the U.S. Navy Space and Naval Warfare Systems Center Pacific's Enterprise Cybersecurity Program. Elliot holds a master's degree in computer science from the University of California, Irvine, and a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics from Pepperdine University. So now, please join me in welcoming Elliot to deliver our keynote presentation about what keeps healthcare CISOs up at night. Elliot, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Tantien. Thank you for the warm introduction, and thank you all for having me here today. So as Tantien said, the title of this presentation is What Keeps Healthcare CISOs Up at Night. To be candid with you, I have 3 kids and a dog. By the end of the day, there's not much that's keeping me up at night. But it is a good hyperbole, and it does help us, I think, talk through some of the threats that healthcare is facing today from some very sophisticated threat actors. So we'll spend some time talking through what we'll call the healthcare threat landscape. And I'll share my screen now and we can go through that detail. So just one moment. And should be presenting now. Is everyone able to see that?
I think it's slowly coming up.
We'll give it a second while it's coming up. So I've structured the session today to talk a little bit about some of the trends we're seeing in healthcare threat landscape today. Also, what we envision for the future. Based on that trends analysis, where are we seeing some of the threats evolving and going towards healthcare in the future, and still not presenting? Is that...
There you go. Oh, whatever just popped up.
Let's see.
Yeah, it flashed up and then went away.
Let's try again.
Bingo.
Yep.
Good?
You're good to go.
Yes, we see.
Okay, great. Please let me know if something isn't going through with what's being presented. I actually don't see it in the presentation here, but I have it next to me. But what will, again, I think a good way to start is talking about some of the common attackers who is actually threatening healthcare today. And we can categorize them in 4 different big buckets. By and large, the first largest threat actors that we see today are organized crime. These are financially motivated groups. Their focus is stealing sensitive information that has value, selling that information, performing identity theft, and conducting ransomware operations. So the reason is pretty obvious, is healthcare is very valuable. When you look at the spectrum of different kinds of sensitive information, whether it's personally identifiable information, social security numbers, payment cards, healthcare is the largest and most expensive. When you look at resale, it can value anywhere from $1 to $250 on the dark web, depending on the nature of the data and the quantity. But the obvious use of that data are things like extortion, conducting identity theft, insurance fraud. Also, you'll see that data being used for follow-on attacks because it does give you a lot of information about an individual that could be used for social engineering, for example. Another kind of type of attack that we see is, or group of attackers that we see is what we would call cyber terrorists or hacktivists. These are typically ideologically motivated folks. They may want to influence an opinion. They may have a cause that they want to draw attention to, or it may just be causing damage, again, focused on some sort of cause. A good example would be, you probably saw a group called Anonymous Sudan get indicted back in October last year. That was based on some attacks in 2023. They were called distributed denial of service attacks. They're believed to be an anti-Zionist group, but they seem to align with pro-Russian agendas. And this is a perfect example of cyber terrorism. It's just conducting damage for the sake of propagating some cause. State-sponsored is one we've seen a lot of in 2024. These are clearly politically motivated, may try to influence some geopolitical opinion, but often what's happening with state-sponsored is espionage. They're after sensitive information, or they may be trying to cause destruction or position themselves to cause destruction that may further some sort of military cause. What we're seeing in some sanction groups like North Korea, Russia, is an effort to fund a regime. So it's actually drawing in revenue, drawing from that organized crime financial motivation in order to bring revenue towards some sort of advancement within a state-sponsored organization. So the fourth one, the category that is often overlooked, is insider threat. And that's us. It's either us for intentional or unintentional reasons. Sometimes it's a employee that is seeking retribution, trying to get revenge in some way. Our employees deal with very sensitive data that has value, so it could be financially motivated, somebody trying to achieve financial gain to either sell that information or sell access to a third party that would, again, grant some sort of financial benefit to the individual. But a very common one is unintentional disclosure. And this can be misdirected email, it can be misdirected mail, physical mail, anything where it's really just somebody working too fast and clumsily either granting access or disseminating data to a third party that is not the intended recipient. And so that's a very common insider threat component that we see. Another activity in insider threat is unauthorized access to patient records. This is a very common one. It can be a celebrity, it can be a family member or a coworker. Any of those cases where somebody is accessing records in an unauthorized way, we would consider that an insider threat. What's notably absent from this slide is third party or supply chain. And that is an incredibly common one these days. And we are more interconnected than ever. We're more dependent than ever on outside partners for IT products and service delivery. And so as a result, any of these four attack types can be targeted towards one of our third parties and then leveraged for either lateral movement into our environment as a healthcare provider, or in order to disrupt services for our service delivery for healthcare. So you can kind of see these four categories, and then the overarching of third party or supply chain is the common attack types that we see. Let's see. So let's go over some of the kind of trends we're seeing across these four. In organized crime, I would say year over year, we're seeing much more ransomware. Before, we used to be very focused on confidentiality of data. And that's when you look at regulations like HIPAA, they're very structured towards confidential data. And breach is one of the number one driving factors behind some of those older regulations. And some of the older defense tactics that we put in place when we were thinking about security. In a more modern threat landscape, the focus is now on availability. It's on keeping systems up. It's on making sure that we can maintain operations and business continuity during a major cyber disruption from an attack like ransomware. A lot of the attacks that we see in ransomware are very focused on causing destruction. That means either encrypting data, taking systems offline, destroying backups, making it very difficult for an organization to recover from this kind of attack, and that incentivizes a payment. Typically, the payment is dramatically smaller than the destruction that was caused and the recovery cost of getting systems back online post-attack. So ransomware is, I think, a common threat that we've seen historically, but it has been ever increasing year over year. In fact, in 2023, that was the first year that we saw ransomware payments surpass $1 billion. I think it was a little over $1.2 billion in payments, depending on the source that you look at. So definitely an increase. We also saw some of the largest payments, single payments that we've ever seen. Tantian mentioned Change Healthcare. Their payment was purported to be $22 million. There was another pharmaceutical payment, Syncora. Purportedly they paid $75 million in ransom. So the size of the ransomware payments has consistently increased year over year. Looking at the cyber terrorist hacktivist space, we mentioned Anonymous Sudan, the United healthcare attack, or killing, I should say, of United's CEO. That definitely blended the lines between physical security and digital security. And it really has, I think, made a lot of health organizations revisit the digital presence of their executives. What information is being posted on location, where they're traveling, more information less information on who the executives are and within the organization because of that continued threat from potential copycat attacks, similar to what happened with the United CEO. You probably saw a lot of news on wastewater attacks. There was nearly a dozen different wastewater treatment plant attacks in 2024. They were attributed to a variety of different nation states and hacktivist activities. So these are either pro-Iran groups, pro-Chinese, pro-Russian groups. It's unclear whether these are directly affiliated with state-sponsored adversaries or whether these are more in the cyber terrorism hacktivist group. So I put that in that bucket. Going down to the lower left, when we start looking at state-sponsored, so lots of activity from North Korea. So you may have seen some articles on North Korean teleworkers. These were IT workers that were fraudulently taking positions in foreign countries like the US. And the idea is that they were then taking in revenue to fund nuclear weapons programs in North Korea. We also saw a lot of espionage. You may have heard of the Silk Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, Volt Typhoon. These are People's Republic of China sponsored groups. What was interesting about their attacks on telecom, there were about 10 different major telco groups in the US that were compromised by Silk Typhoon, is the CISA's position was that their motives were inconsistent with traditional cyber espionage. So the theory is that they were pre-positioning themselves for some sort of damage-based attack that would be conducted in the future, potentially for military operations. We also saw in 2024 a compromise of Treasury. Again, this was attributed back to Silk Typhoon, where they gained access to the OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets Control, and it gained access to quite a bit of sensitive unclassified data. Going over to insider threat, the Data Breach Investigation Report is a publication that comes out of Verizon every year. And their 2024 report, I think, was very telling. And I talked about misdelivery earlier. They cited over 50% of the accidental disclosures were misdelivery related. So it really, I think, emphasizes the need to address some of that insider threat risk by putting in technology controls, procedural controls that can help protect us from either misdirected emails, misdirected mailers, anything where disclosure of information is happening from an accidental perspective, from individuals, employees acting either carelessly or too fast for their needs in order to protect that information. Moving on to the next slide. So we talked a little bit about ransomware. We can talk about year-over-year activity and some of the trends we see there. Some of this data is from 2023, but we can also cover in the voiceover some of the 2024 data. In 2023, we did see a large increase in the number of ransomware investigations from 18 to 23%. And we saw an increase also in data leak site organizations. If you're not familiar with a leak site, these are threat actors that operate usually on the dark web, a website where they're disclosing their victims. And the idea is by disclosing the victim publicly, that would incentivize a payment or prompt a faster or larger payment from that victim. And so when we see, 1,237 was the number of leak site organizations or victims that were disclosed in 2023. That does represent a large increase, almost a fifth increase over what we saw in 2022. We're also seeing a very large increase in 2024. I think the median increase in victims, the percent increase in Q4 of 2024 was 47% over what we saw in Q3 of 2023. So the victim counts, it does increase year over year. Also, we're seeing the median payment increase went up from about 200,000 in 2023 to about 1.5 million in 2024. So much larger payments are happening. One interesting trend, though, that we're seeing is I mentioned that over $1 billion in payments in 2023. And in 2024, we did see a decrease in overall payments. I think the number is just over 800 million from most estimates. So with that decrease, it's kind of a weird dichotomy is you're seeing higher payments, more victims, but lower overall payments. So I think you can kind of draw some conclusions from that is that we're basically seeing less payment, but more ransomware activity and more destructive ransomware activity because the cost of recovery is increasing as well. And that is kind of cited a little bit in this graph that you see on the right. And this is a chart from Palo Alto. It's hard to read, but the light red is 2022 data. And the dark red is 2023 data. And so what you're seeing is a decrease in the impacts of ransomware attacks as it relates to legal and regulatory, and a dramatic increase in business disruption. So nearly over a double from an impact perspective in business disruption. So what that means is the tactics that ransomware threat actors are using is to cause more damage, and with the intent of, again, incentivizing a payment. So it's less about confidentiality breaches now and extortion of confidentiality, and more about causing disruption and limiting the ability of the organization, the victim organization, to be able to recover and provide their services and incentivizing them to pay in order to achieve that recovery. All right, let's talk a little bit about time to target. This is a concept of how much time we have in order to identify a threat and eradicate that threat or contain that threat from causing more damage. And so when we look at the amount of time we have as incident responders, it's a good indicator of how our threat actors are using tactics to their advantage in order to achieve results. So we can start with that lower left number where we're seeing a decrease in what we call dwell time, median dwell time. Dwell time is a concept of how much time the attacker spends in the compromised, the victim's environment before they're detected. That can be two different ways. They can be detected because the good guys, the incident responders found them, detected them, and got them out. Or it can be they made themselves known by activating, by conducting ransomware, by doing something malicious to the environment. So what we're seeing, though, is that decrease in dwell time that is a quite considerable decrease from 2022 to 2023, from 16 days to 10 days. In that middle chart, what you're seeing there is the time from initial access. That could be initial access from a successful phishing campaign where someone clicked a link and downloaded some malware, maybe granted that initial access, to when they were able to conduct data theft or conduct ransomware or ultimately achieve their goal on target. And so that median time from initial access to ransomware deployment was on average 6 days. I'm sorry, the median time was 6 days. Now, that was when data was stolen. When data was not stolen, that decreased down to 2 days. So really what we're talking about is about a third of the cases, there was about 48 hours of time that elapsed from initial access to deployment of that ransomware. So that's not a lot of time when you look at how much available time we have to our incident responders to detect that incident, to identify a containment mechanism, and ultimately eradicate the threat actor from the environment. And then finally, that last number you see on the right, we call the mean breakout time. This comes from Palo Alto's research. And that's the time it takes from initial access to make your first lateral movement. That lateral movement is something where privileges might be escalated. You might go from a workstation to a server. You might go from a regular account to an administrator level account. And in 2024, that only took 62 minutes. So not a lot of time elapses from that initial access to where the adversary has either gotten a more persistent foothold, gotten the access they need in order to conduct damage, or has actually executed damage in the operation of a ransomware activity or of data breach. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about healthcare specific. We are seeing, again, year-over-year increase in the types of attacks, the number of attacks, frequency of attacks against healthcare. And this is in September through November is when this data was collected, and nearly 12 million records were stolen there, exposed through cyber attacks, to over a total of 145. And the average number of patients attacked or impacted in a healthcare organization attack is 81,000. So very big numbers, especially when you're talking about OCR's representation of what constitutes a major breach, and that is certainly in that realm. And then healthcare is still one of the top targeted industry sectors. I think in 2024, just based on that leak site analysis that we talked about earlier, the only one higher was construction. So healthcare is still a very targeted industry sector throughout ransomware and other attack types. So what should we expect? 2025 is here. So here's kind of a collection of different forecasts from different venues. The first one is pretty clear, is that healthcare is going to remain a top target. And this is an obvious one. The incentives haven't changed. It's still financially valuable for attackers to go after. There's still motivation. So it's not unlikely that we'll continue to see increases in the types and frequency of attack against healthcare. I would expect ransomware to continue to increase in its destructive nature. Remember how we talked about the decrease in total payment amount, the decrease in frequency of payments, but the increase in attacks and victims. I think that will persist. And I think we'll also see more damage conducted, again, to try and incentivize payment. So that means the cost of recovery is going to continue to go up. I think we're going to see a lot more AI in attacks. you probably read about an attack that occurred in Hong Kong. There's a company that was a victim. It's called deep fake. When you use AI generated images and voice in order to conduct social engineering, where a Hong Kong company was susceptible to that and lost about $26 million in wire fraud. And it was someone pretending to be the CEO through an AI generated voice. There was another famous incident where Ferrari, an executive, was called by an AI generated voice simulating their CEO, Benedetto Vigna. Fortunately, they were able to thwart that one, but this is a very common trend now. Being able to generate deep fake video and voice is easier than it's ever been. It used to take hours of video footage, hours of audio, and then days of model training in order to create a convincing deepfake. These days, it takes a single picture and a few sentences of audio voice in order to conduct to create a convincing deepfake audio or video. And so those kinds of attacks are going to be more frequent and more prevalent. And so it's really incumbent on organizations like healthcare organizations to make sure they have procedures in place that are effective in thwarting these kinds of attacks. The geopolitical situation is not changing. We're seeing more disruption in the Middle East, more continued disruption in Ukraine and Russia. So that geopolitical instability is going to prompt additional attacks from nation state. And the lines between nation state and criminals is blurrier than ever. Lots of resources are being shared by nation states, whether it's money, whether it's intelligence, or human resources, labor, in order to conduct criminal activities, is being supplied by nation state actors. And so you're starting to see nation state and criminal organizations be one and the same. And then, of course, we're going to see that continued espionage activity coming from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Those are good revenue generators for them, and cybercrime and information operations are going to be prevalent. Talking specifically about AI, I bucket how we look at AI risk in really three different quadrants, or three different sections, I should say. The first one is protecting. AI is incredibly powerful for our knowledge workers. It's important for us to use AI, to use these large language models to improve productivity, to drive new revenue streams, to make our organizations more effective. But in doing so, we have to make sure we're protecting them. The kinds of attacks against AI are different. The approach that we take to cybersecurity often mirrors traditional cybersecurity approaches, but the types of attacks, from prompt injection to model theft to denial of service and resource consumption, are different. For example, a publicly exposed prompt, if a denial of service attack against that, could be very financially damaging. Those tokens that are generated when we do prompt execution and get results from a model can be very expensive. So any sort of abuse of that prompt can have monetary impacts, if not total loss of either a model or can cause the model to do things that were never intended. On the right, being able to defend against new AI attacks. We talked a little bit about AI being used in deepfake generation. So many other uses of AI. There was a good paper out of University of Illinois from last year talking about how to use AI agents to exploit zero-day vulnerabilities, being able to generate malicious code faster than we ever have been before. Using models like, there was a model called Fraud GPT that was released last year that enabled you to create phishing emails, more convincing phishing emails. So just like we try to empower our knowledge workers to be more efficient and effective using AI, criminal elements are as well. So they're using that technology to enable their operations, to achieve productivity gains, and to be more effective in their criminal operations. It's a good paper from Google's threat intelligence report on how threat actors are using Gemini to do just that. So using AI, again, to conduct more effective, efficient criminal operations. So we have to be able to defend against that. That means using that productivity to our advantage as well. Putting in new controls that can spot AI-generated attacks, and putting preventative controls that can thwart them as well. Going to the bottom, improving cybersecurity processes using AI advancements. So a lot of the work that is conducted in incident response, in security architecture, in security engineering are knowledge workers that can leverage LLMs, that can leverage AI in order to drive productivity. So it is important that we're also using AI not just to enable our business and our traditional business practices, but also to enable our security disciplines and making them more effective in their productivity gains for service delivery of security offerings. So we'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
Actually, Elliot, there is I think we sort of exceeded our time because so there is a question from an attendee. Can deepfake audios be generated from a voicemail greeting? I wonder if you could take the chance to.
Possibly. It depends on the inflection points, how much audio there is, what consonants, what syllables are used in that voicemail greeting, but potentially yes. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of voice now to generate a convincing AI-generated voice.
You know, in the interest of time, may I ask for the attendees to post any question for Elliot in the chat? And if Elliot, if you don't mind hanging on for a few more minutes, that allow us to flow into our next topic here. Michael, back to you, please.
Thank you, Tatiana. And thank you, Elliot, for a fantastic presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Pull up my information here. Dr. Adrian Mayers joined Premera Blue Cross in November 2019, as CISO and Vice President of IT. He is responsible for providing and optimizing an enterprise-wide security program and architecture that minimizes risk, enables business imperatives, and further strengthens Premera's security posture. He works closely with Premera's leadership team to establish and maintain a comprehensive program to protect employees, information assets, and technologies, and to mature the corporate culture from security awareness to accountability. Throughout his 20-year career, he has dealt with various aspects of corporate security, such as anti-fraud operations, cybersecurity, intellectual property protection, counter-espionage, and loss prevention. It's our pleasure to welcome Dr. Adrian Mayers, Vice President and CISO with Premera Blue Cross.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon and good morning to some, anybody that's on the West Coast like myself. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when you can see it. There. Change.
It is up.
It is up. Perfect. Okay. Well, I will get going. So that last session was great. Elliot, I appreciate everything that you did. We should probably take our show on the road. That'll be fun. So this one is specifically about making AI mainstream at a payer. So obviously it goes beyond payers, right? Just AI in general, which I think is super important. And there's a lot of things that Elliot hit that I'll touch on a little bit. But there are some things that you'll see repeated because we need to foot stomp some of these things. It's just so important. So let's get into it. Let's go over the agenda real quick. So talking about, generative AI in healthcare, kind of what are we seeing? Where's the money going? Where's the money flowing? AI strategy and philosophy. So specifically at Premera, we'll talk a little bit about that. The CISO perspective, how I see the state of the state. The bigger picture. There's a national security imperative here that I never want to lose an opportunity to share, some of my perspectives and raise awareness on what that means. AI governance program, and then some key takeaways. And if we have time for questions, that'll be great. So first of all, who the heck am I? What am I doing here? So, and how did I get here? A lot of things on this screen here, but one of the things I did want to share with the group was why did I choose healthcare? What is it about this mission set that is so important and resonates with me? Thinking about people needing access to healthcare, not feeling well, finding doctors, getting good drugs, reliable drugs, all of these things, that is a human feeling and a human perspective. And when I was thinking about, what comes next, where do I want to go, how do I want to apply my skills, healthcare made sense. That was a mission set that I could get behind. The ability to protect and defend that capability and those services made a lot of sense to me. So opportunity presented itself at Premier in 2019. So I jumped on that as quickly as I could, and it's been a great journey thus far. The other things that I do, and you'll see that little arrow there, is what I do outside. So there's a few organizations that I work with, specifically the National Security Institute out of George Mason University, doing some great work in this space, all up about how we should think about this cyber domain at scale. What does it mean for our national security, and then global, implications from that. The Health Sector Coordinating Council, so being able to drive, conversations between the healthcare industry, private side, as well as our government partners, and really taking a whole of nation approach to making healthcare work better and safer. And then one of my new affiliations here is with the Washington Military Department, and working with the governor of Washington to think about cybersecurity in a different way. So critical infrastructures, different people coming together and really having some meaningful conversations around that. So all important things, making a contribution, trying to pull people together. It definitely takes a village. So when we think about healthcare, what are we seeing? What are we seeing specifically around generative AI? What's happening? And honestly, you just got to follow the money. If you're operating in this space, we're seeing 75% of healthcare organizations trying to figure out what does it mean for generative AI capabilities, machine learning, whatever it is, the whiz bang that they need to pull into their organization to not only differentiate, but to enrich and augment their deliverables back to their customers, members, patients, what have you. So you think about the investments that are happening, right? $22 billion are being poured into this, specifically in healthcare, because it is such a target-rich environment, so much opportunity there. Very, very important to be thinking about that. And obviously, I don't know if we're hitting this number yet, but the ability to save, right? The potential cost savings in healthcare are pretty astronomical, $150 billion there. So probably not going to hit that this year, but we'll see. I think we're trending in that direction for sure. So these stats came out last year, so we'll see how it's going. So when we think about the keys to this solution, this problem set, there are a bunch of companies that are doing some really exciting work in the space, figuring out where their niche is specifically, and then doubling down on that, bringing some really interesting value propositions to the market. So it's an exciting time to be in the space, but it requires a certain mindset to be able to capitalize on this. So traditionally, little slow going, but I think what we're seeing right now with AI in healthcare is an accelerator. So I definitely want to be on that journey, and I think you do as well. So you're a healthcare organization. Well, what should you consider when it comes to generative AI and AI specifically? And I'll talk to you about our story and how we came about to being where we are. And there was a lot of lessons learned. So it really started like 3 years ago when we were thinking about this. And I'll give you a for instance. That happened over the last year when we were implementing Microsoft M365 Copilot, and how that went. And that was really our first interesting foray into adopting generative AI and at scale across the organization. And what did we have to think about? So it wasn't just about the technology, I can tell you that. It was really a big part of the conversation was about human beings. Oh, wait, there are people that are going to use the technology, and we need to make sure that they understand what it is. How can they use it to enrich and augment their workflows and what they're doing on a daily basis? How do we govern this? What's coming in? What's going out? How are we sharing information? What does the data look like? What's the data quality look like? there were so many questions that we honestly weren't thinking about until we got into it. But it was extremely exciting when we actually started partnering across the entire organization, entire enterprise, to make this happen. So let me hit on a few of these real quick. So obviously the workforce, prepping the workforce and making sure that the workforce is ready to embrace this technology at scale, to be able to get the true quality and the true value and benefits out of it. That's a lot of work. A lot of training, a lot of conversations, the willingness to answer questions, right? There are no stupid questions. People coming and saying, look, I don't get this. Why should this make sense? Taking the time and provisioning the time and giving people grace to learn, so important. The governance aspect, right? Who's making the decisions about what? How do you start to coalesce around that? Who's at the table? Who's not? Who's informed? Who's not? All of these things have to be kind of laid out. Policies and procedures. Highly regulated industry, obviously, there's a lot of policies and procedures in our organizations, but the ability to rewrite those to make sure that there's not only a foundational level of policies and procedures, and you build on what you already have, but the ability to iterate as you grow, super important. Security controls, near and dear to my heart, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. The change management piece. So there's a correlation back to that human component, right? That workforce component. How do you manage that change management? It's a fundamental shift on what we're talking about, and a lot of anxiety, and potentially, some grievances around that shift. Well, is this new technology going to take my job or not? What does that mean? You have to talk about it. You have to talk through it. Super important. Cloud computing, data management. The data management piece was interesting. Really robust, data management, data governance program at Primera, but we had to start rethinking about data quality. If we're teaching models, if Copilot, for example, is pulling data, what's the quality of that data? Because obviously it's going to leverage that to be able to give us outcomes and answers to the questions that we have based on prompting. So we had to go back and rethink that a little bit, just to make sure that our T's were crossed and our I's were dotted. And then automation, where do we leverage that? What large language models are we going to be using? So our corporate data and analytics team, great job, great partnership across the organization with cyber, with legal, with our compliance team, with HR. It was quite something, and it continues. So we're looking for what comes next and doubling down on what we've established thus far. It's very exciting. So I want to hit a little bit on kind of this strategy and philosophy idea, and I'm kind of have it bucketed here in three different ways. When we were thinking about leveraging the technology and making a significant change at Primera, we had to go back to our core. What are we trying to do? What is our purpose? Obviously, the overall purpose is making healthcare work better. But what does that mean from an AI standpoint? How do we start to think about integrating that into our different aspects of our operation? How do we embrace it to truly improve our member, customer, patient outcomes? How does that make it better for them? If that is fuzzy, you need to go back to the drawing board and ask a few more questions and try to figure that out. Because just implementing, this great technology without truly understanding what your North Star is can fall flat for some of the stakeholders that are involved and the interested parties that are going to be impacted by such a change. And then this idea of making sure that the data that we're using, the technology that we're using, again, continues to level up what we're doing. Not all AIs are built the same. So how do you pick and choose which one you're going to implement, how much resources you're going to put towards it? All of those things have to be factored in. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the governance piece. Now, governance is like, governance. I can hear the eye rolls out there now. Now, this is the part where you absolutely have to get right and spend some time. And we started having conversations, and this was actually like 3 years ago. I remember sitting in a conference room, 3 VPs, myself, the head of corporate data and analytics, and the head of compliance and ethics. And we're having a conversation, and we said, look, this is what's coming. How do we start to pull together and make sure that we are aligned for how this is going to hit the organization? What is the business imperative? How is it going to help us differentiate? How is it going to make, our workforce better and more productive? We need to start thinking about strategies together as opposed to passing the baton in the more traditional or sequential type of way. Legal will look at it, then it'll pass over to compliance and ethics, then the corporate data and analytics will look at it, then security will look at it. Now we wanted to be able to be in the same room having the conversation about the topic at the same time. So this is where the Data, AI, and Ethics Committee came from and was born 3 years ago. So the DEIC is an amalgamation and cross-functional teams from across the organization, and we get together pretty heavy cadence now. We get together about every couple of weeks and talk about different things in the AI space and how are we implementing, what are the new technologies that we should be thinking about. So constantly learning, but it is an amazing place to make sure that we're doing the right thing, but also not stifling the pace of innovation. So being able to have that body and have that committee stood up has really made all the difference. And then there's other pieces, right? So out of that committee, we were able to generate our AI guiding principles. How are we formulating? Then there was a bunch of information out there, and we had to figure out, what did it mean for us? How did we have to look at it and make it personalized to us? And we were able to do that. And you'll see those principles there, and we stick to those, tried and true. They really help us and guide us when we get to those inflection points, right? Those kind of the why in the road, right? You go left, you go right. Well, hang on, let's go back to our principles and let those govern if we go left or if we go right. And it's been super helpful to us. This idea of an extended ecosystem, and Elliot, hit on this a little bit, right? The third parties. What does it mean for being in a relationship, contractual relationship with a third party, strategic partner, what have you? What are the expectations there that you should be communicating? And bidirectionally, by the way, because it is a bidirectional relationship, but being very clear about the expectations, absolutely critical. So we were able to carve those out and pull some of that language into our contracts. And then that last piece there about the inventory. Well, what's what? What do you have today? What's in the pipeline? What are you deprecating potentially? The ability to have a really good inventory of the AI capabilities and applications that you have in your environment, absolutely critical. And once you use that as your foundational jump off point, then you can start to have some pretty interesting conversations. So going back to this committee structure. So I talked about the DEIC, Data and AI Ethics Committee, but there are a few other committees. I love all my committees, but the Information Protection Committee, which is the one that I run, is awesome. But there is a harmonization effort that was super important for us. So the IPC, DEIC, our Data SEER Committee, our AI, Leadership Committee, bringing all of those committees together to share certain topics. Now, they all have different charters. They all have, kind of different mission sets, if you will. But you start bringing in those common, goals, topics, what have you. You get those different perspectives, and all of a sudden, you really do have some coalescing around these ideas, and it starts to move and continue a really good momentum and pace when it comes to implementing some of these technologies and capabilities. So harmonizing and leveraging governance in a different way, not seeing it as something to bog down or be friction, but actually as an accelerator because we've harmonized and pulled these things together. So that has been a huge difference for us. So I pulled this slide in here. This is a couple of years old. So the 4 factors of trust. And when you think about AI, bringing it into the organization, you have to think about what are those fundamentals. There are people that are at, either in your organization, your strategic partners, what have you, your patients, members. Everybody's going to have a perspective on the usage of this and how it's going to enrich or augment their lives potentially. If you stay true to these trust factors that were called out here in this great report by Deloitte, I think you're good. So you think about the principles that guide the efforts, but there's also something fundamental around trust that I think is super important. So I just wanted to bring this into the conversation as well. At the end of the day, technology does not exist for the sake of technology. It exists to enrich and augment the human experience. So we can never forget that. Okay, so CISO, security, bunch of responsibilities, barely sleeping at night. Why is that? Well, there's a few reasons. Elliot nailed this really well, so I'll just touch on this briefly, but kind of three perspectives or aspects. Thinking about what does it mean to implement AI in your space, and potentially what does it mean from a vulnerability standpoint? Am I making myself weaker or not if I'm using these different models or these different capabilities, either homegrown, internally, or if I'm purchasing something from an external vendor? Is that going to make my security posture, my security program weaker in any way, shape, or form? If it is, how do I make sure that I identify those vulnerabilities and have the right mitigating controls in place so that you're not exploited in some way, shape, or form by a nation state or somebody else, some other threat actor? And then obviously, how threat actors are using it. And I won't go into that. Elliot nailed that really well, but something you have to think about. The same technology that you're using to differentiate yourself in the space, provide different value propositions to your members, customers, patients, what have you. Same technology that threat actors are going to use to try to disrupt you or harm you in a significant way, interrupting your services and all of those things. And then how do you think about your security operations, leveraging that? How do you think about bringing that to really accelerate your capability to protect, defend, and enable your company? So a lot of conversations there about what's happening in the security space. Very exciting time there. So on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about, and I've used this protection model for the last 20 years. It hasn't failed me yet, and it helps me think about AI. So always have to cover off, kind of these 6 areas, if you will. But by leveraging this protection model, regardless of the emerging technology that's coming into play, I'm sure the next call will be about quantum, which will be awesome. Protection model still applies, right? You still have these fundamental things, and the foundational element that you have to be thinking about. And how does that scale? How does that change? How does that evolve? But you always have to have a North Star, at least some semblance of foundation to be able to springboard off of. So on this next slide, I a little bit of a smattering of some of these capabilities, and I highlighted in blue where we're leveraging. And this is primarily with our strategic partners and vendors, because they're bringing in generative AI capabilities into their solutions. So our security stack is seeing AI peppered all throughout it. And that's through great partnerships with our vendor community. So when it comes to data discovery, user behavior analytics, all of these things get even better when you apply generative AI and AI capabilities to them correctly. Endpoint protection platforms are doing some great things now. Our SIM, right, doing amazing things now that weren't possible 10 years ago at scale, or the speed that we're able to pivot, really getting good fidelity, good information to be able to make informed decisions, absolutely critical. So pivoting a little bit, and I really appreciate Elliot's summary slide, the predictions for 2025, because they resonate with me. They should resonate with all of us. This is a reality. We're living in interesting times, and the responsibility that is bestowed upon us is significant. So when I think about AI, generative AI, what have you, I start thinking about things in 3 dimensions, right? I think about the individual, myself, my family, what have you, coworkers leveraging something on their phone, ChatGPT or whatever app they have. How are they thinking and using and changing their lifestyle based on this new technology? Then I think about the business. I think about Premier. I think about other blues, within the BCBSA, other companies within the payer space in U.S. healthcare, and then all up, thinking about U.S. healthcare. There's a business imperative there. How do you figure out how to innovate, how to leverage value? All of those things are constantly conversations, all the way from the board all the way down. And then the third way that I think about this is from a geopolitical standpoint. I think about the national security, implications to the U.S., to our strategic partners globally, and what does that mean? The ability, obviously, to accelerate and really enrich and augment our capabilities, whether it be, from a DoD lens or a DOJ lens or what have you. But, statecraft is going to be impacted by what's happening within this cyber domain. And AI has the ability to accelerate or to potentially hinder some of those movements. There's a little quote in there from the UN Secretary General that had a pretty strong opinion back in December of 2024, and there's something to that. The ability to leverage AI to do certain things always has to have that human component in it in some way, shape, or form. You have to be thinking about how is this going to impact humanity, whether it be something small or something significant. But keeping that in mind allows us to make, I think, much better decisions as we move forward here. This is not something to shy away from or be afraid of, but we need to be informed. If we're informed, we make better decisions and we think about what comes next. We are geared to create, to build tools, to evolve, and that shouldn't be arrested or slowed down or protracted in some way, shape, or form because we don't have enough information. There's an abundance of information that we have access to. The ability for us to slow down and actually consume it, that's a challenge, but that's on us to figure it out. So wanted to give that perspective as well. So as you can tell, this is a high-speed, low-drag session. And the last piece that I wanted to talk about just before we go to this is how do you start to pull this all together? So the snapshot that I have here, it's kind of a summary of what we've been able to build, from an AI governance standpoint, programmatically. And it's been working super, super well for us. So the ability for us to think about our strategy and where does AI come into play. And what's interesting is it's not just the technology, but it gives us a different way of solving and thinking about even defining problems. AI may not be the solution, but the ability to think differently and to remove certain constraints that we've had in the past allows us to be creative and to imagine all kinds of interesting solutions, whether it be an AI solution or not. So those conversations are happening kind of at that guidance level, if you will. And then you get into the more traditional governance posture where you have your policies. The SAGE process that we set up, strategic AI governance evaluation, has made all the difference. The ability for us to truly triage how we're thinking about bringing in net new AI capabilities, whether we're creating them internally or whether we're consuming something from a vendor or a strategic partner, there is a rigor and a diligence that's being done through that process that has really been substantial for us. And then obviously, highly regulated industry, as I stated, building out the right controls, the right ability to monitor and understand deviations. People have the best intentions, but sometimes there's a slight deviation. So you need to be able to have controls that can understand how people are leveraging and using this technology, and then extending that out to your extended ecosystem, right? The ability for companies to just be within their four walls and then deliver things like they used to is no longer really a case, right? There are dependencies that go beyond. So setting those expectations and being very clear on how that's going to work in your vendor community, super critical. And then I talk a little bit about change management, and then you finally have to deliver something. You have to land the planes. So what does that look like? How do you do that in a meticulous way so that you don't have any faults or issues as you're trying to implement some of these solutions? All right. So what should you remember? A lot of things. You've heard a lot of information today. But some of the key takeaways, from my perspective, healthcare right now is extremely exciting. It's reshaping itself. You want to be a part of that change. There's no question about that. You have to think about all of the other things that are outside the technology when you're thinking about implementing AI, right? That human factor, the learning, the teaching, the ability to give that grace. The ability to establish, responsible AI policies, right? Your foundational elements that will help you when there is a friction point. What does the policy say? What are those guiding principles? How do we work through this problem set to find a solution? What does the governance mechanism need to look like? And then primarily from a security standpoint, but it really, applies across the entire industry or organization, right? Is this idea of balancing those opportunities and those challenges. There are some things that are potentially worry bubbles when it comes to AI, but I think there's more opportunities than there are challenges. So I think you got to keep that pedal to the metal. And then the last thing is, remember the bigger picture here. There are bigger things going on across this world, and technology is not slowing down in any way, shape, or form. So as you balance, as you think about the actions that you're taking in your organization, in your home, or what have you, they have ripple effects. So always think about the big picture as you're thinking about those different actions that you're taking. So, okay, well, that concludes this presentation, and not sure if we're at the Q&A portion here or not, but
yes, we are. We can go for one if you have the time.
I do, absolutely.
Excellent. First of all, thank you so much. It was a fantastic presentation. Question from the audience: how do you deal with the fact that generative AI is often inaccurate and doesn't correctly represent the source material or apply it in a reasonable way? Presumably, it will improve, but it's not there yet.
I love that question, and we usually hear about this at least once a month. And here's what's interesting about that, right? So confabulations, hallucinations, what have you. The key here is to understand that it's not always going to get it right. And I think initially, when you read, the shiny glossy label on the box, you're like, oh, this is great. And all of a sudden it's like, well, wait, hang on, that's not accurate at all. So there has to be, and this is why having a human in the loop is so important. You have to take a step back and ask yourself, well, hang on, is that right? Because this blind trusting of the outcomes and the outputs of these tools is problematic. So I think they are going to get better over time, but you have to take a little bit of a grain of salt with some of the outcomes that you're looking at. And if you know that, then right? It's not knowing or not, kind of ascribing to that that's going to get you in trouble. But assume that it's getting better, but always kind of take a step back and validate those outcomes if you can. So I think it's a great question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Adrian Mayers with Primera Blue Cross. It was a pleasure having you on the spotlight, and we hope to see you again very soon at future WEDI events.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. That was excellent. Both of our previous speakers, so much for us to think about. I'm delighted as well as Tantian is for our next panel. We're going to actually turn our discussion a little bit and talk a little bit more about interoperability and where we stand from a security perspective. I have 3 speakers lined up, and I'm happy to tell you all that I know each of them. One, even though I've known of him for a while, I've formally known him for a few days. One, I've known and worked with for a few years, and one I've known and worked with for decades. So exciting to be able to have all 3 of you on the panel. So we're going to start first with Lee Barrett, who is the Direct Trust Commission Executive Director. We're going to have Lee talk a little bit about his experience from really beginning with an accreditation standard setting body in the mid-1990s and trending it forward to where we stand today. Just some of the key thoughts that he's seen as we've changed and become ready to continue to future-proof our healthcare system. We're then going to switch up the order a little bit and go to David Pike. He's our Security Technical Director for the Fire at Scale Task Force. We're going to ask him to tell us a little bit about FAST today, where it stands, what its key points and goals are, and then he's going to be turning the introduction to Dr. Louis Moss, speaking about the HL7 security implementation guide specifically. And Louis Moss is the security lead for the Fire at Scale Task Force as well, also the CTO for EMR Direct. So Tantian and I are thrilled to have them. We hope you stay and listen. Each will speak probably 10 to 12 minutes. We would encourage you to continue to ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to make this as interactional as possible. So Lee, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Leslie, and hello, everybody. I'm the person that Leslie was talking about that she's known for decades, and we go way back. There's a lot that's happened in the industry in the 40 plus years that I've been in this industry, and so Leslie has kind of asked me to kind of give kind of a chronology of how I've seen some of this evolve. So if you look at this, when I started in 1995, the Electronic Healthcare Network Accreditation Commission was actually formed. And it was formed from what was called the Association for Electronic Healthcare Transactions. That was the industry action group back then in 95 for the clearinghouses. Obviously, as many of you probably know, that has evolved into the cooperative exchange today, which is the industry action group for the clearinghouses. But back then, there was a real need and it was a reaction to the concern that there was going to be new legislation, a new healthcare set of regulations around, quote, Hillary Care at that point was termed, and that there was going to be regulations placed on the clearinghouses. They therefore took the time to develop their own accreditation program. It got spun off as a 501c6 nonprofit, and I was recruited to be the executive director. Well, that included, at that time, we were also including HIPAA, privacy, and security as that started to evolve. So we were kind of the first, and we're very early in the game as far as privacy and security, and started the whole process to accredit clearinghouses first. Well, what ended up happening, as we all know, Hillary Care did not happen, and therefore the foot came off the pedal. And it wasn't until about 3 years later when the states of New Jersey as well as Maryland put legislation specifically at the state level that required any payer that used a clearinghouse in those states to need to be accredited by ENAC. So at that point, obviously, as you well know, in 95, 96, we saw HIPAA coming out, and the whole issue on privacy, security really took on a whole new, I would say, rigor for organizations. And that was really what both of those states were concerned about. They were concerned, especially around patient privacy and security. So we started that process in accrediting all of the clearinghouses, and we continued to therefore evolve. And as the industry evolved, obviously HIPAA became a very important aspect and underpinning for organizations as far as their whole privacy and security strategy. As it evolved, we started to see that what ended up happening is that we took on additional accreditations for other organizations and other healthcare stakeholders. So think organizations like accountable care organizations, health information exchanges, medical billers, as well as the financial services industry, banking. Many of the banks, many of you may or may not be aware, also have clearinghouse functions and lockbox operations that they perform on behalf of providers and other healthcare stakeholders as well. So we continue to evolve and increase the number of various sources that we were using. As you started to look at this and how it evolved, then we started to see probably 10 years ago, I would say 8 to 10 years ago, we started to see cybersecurity. And we started to see more cyber threats. So as the cyber threats continued to evolve, we started to incorporate organizations and really what I would call requirements and frameworks like the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST requirements. And NIST has really evolved in relation to the various types of frameworks that they've had, and we've incorporated those into our accreditation framework as well. We've also seen that other organizations and certifying bodies have evolved. I mean, there's High Trust today. There's ENAC, the Direct Trust ENAC. The NIST is primarily a key focal point as far as its framework that we've all incorporated. but there are others like the General Data Regulation, GDPR Regulation Authority, which is really a UK-based entity, and European that we've also incorporated, including things like California and the California Protection Regulation as well for consumers. So we've added all of these. So the industry and the types of frameworks, the types of guidelines have increased dramatically. So that's on the cyber side and how we've seen this evolve. Now we've got other organizations, other entities as well. When you start to look at kind of the whole Fire at Scale task force, that I know David is going to talk more about what they're doing today. But I was involved back in 2017 when the FAST initiative, and so was David, that started, which was really sponsored by ONC for the industry. And really what that was ONC took on the role of being a convener for the industry in relation to looking at FAST and how fire in it was becoming a standard, and how we could look as an industry to develop the types of guidelines, framework, security that was needed for the industry as we were looking to implement fire in various stakeholder environments. So what ended up happening is that at that point, they developed a number of Tiger teams, including ecosystem use cases, identity, directory, version and scale, security, exchange process, testing and certification, which I was a co-chair of, and piloting. And so all of these initiatives started to work. All these Tiger teams worked. We developed several different infrastructure solutions to the point where we got to 3 different versions, to a version 3, where each of these groups had a number of recommendations and white papers that they developed on how the industry could, in fact, not only implement, but secure the process and the implementation of fire as well. So then that whole process morphed and was adopted by HL7 under their HL7 FAST accelerator, and that's where David's going to pick up on a lot of the work that's going on there. I worked very closely with Louis Moss as well. Louis and Julie Moss were very involved as well with this FAST initiative, especially around the security aspects. And this is where the Unified Data Access Profile, UDAP, really took on and became an architectural component and standard for how we were going to look to create things like dynamic registering and authentication between various endpoints. Very important, and really an implementation guide has been developed, it's been out there, and has really helped to facilitate from a security perspective how fire is going to be implemented. So you got the FAST initiative, you've got what's going on in relation to what I would call accreditation and certification entities continuing to evolve. And then, I know that Adrian was also talking about the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council. So the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council became and was formed probably about 6 years ago. But in doing so, what they were looking to do is to really combine the work that was going on in the private sector as well as the public sector around cybersecurity, and get to the point of coalescing all the development efforts, the alerts, the best practices that are being used, and to leverage another initiative that started probably about 7 years ago, which was the Cybersecurity Information, was really formed under the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015. And this is the 405D initiative. And that initiative really focused on creating a number of documents in relation to the whole aspect in the industry, where entities like solo practitioners, group practices, rural and community hospitals, as well as larger networks as well needed assistance around the types of areas from a cybersecurity perspective to raise the bar on cyber hygiene that we needed to move forward on and to develop really some guidelines for them and really resources. And so what they did was they created what's called the Health Industry Cybersecurity Practices documents. And these are resources. In fact, I would tell you all that if you haven't seen those, they're fantastic documents with a lot of great information. The last iteration is a 2023 edition. But again, trying to raise the bar for the industry on cybersecurity hygiene. So as you start to look at all of these, and I'm going to end here, there's a lot of different initiatives that have really coalesced, have come together, continue to work together as we're looking to kind of move the industry forward, whether or not it's on fire, whether or not it's on cybersecurity, whether or not it's on a variety of aspects here and leveraging all the best practices that are out there.
Thanks, Lee. That was an awesome layup. And I think it's so important for people, some that may be newer to this, some that just need to be reminded how everything has evolved and pieced together. So excellent intro to you, David. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, thank you. I have slides because what's life without slides? Well, it's more exciting than it is right now. So let's talk about FAST. Lee was excellent in giving me an introduction and giving FAST introduction. Let's go a little bit more into the details just to get people started. So, and I'll hand it off to Louis after this to tell you about the interesting stuff. So FAST was created to solve a problem. And that problem is the exchange using FHIR or pretty much, any interoperability standard. There's the word. It's a point-to-point effect that requires significant time investment to set up. Now, even after you have your FHIR readiness in place, there's still the steps of getting the endpoint, securing that endpoint, creating an identity. All of these things need to be done. What we want is a future where that just happens, right? So that the way things happen now for X12 and things like that, they just go on. People go to your endpoint, they get set up, they get their identity, and they go. So how do we do that? Well, ONC started us off, as Lee said, way back in 2017 with the payer provider work group trying to solve that problem. Very quickly, it was thought to say, this is much more than just payers and providers. This is a big deal. So the FHIR at Scale Task Force, FAST, was created under ONC's auspices to investigate these, identify the barriers, try to find out ways to fix it and develop those standards. And so for about 2 years, they went through, did the analysis, gathered feedback, really got going, and then started implementation guide development. And then very quickly realized that's not what ONC, now ASTP, does. Their job is to guide, not write standards. So we became the HL7 FHIR Accelerator, FHIR at Scale Task Force. And that started during 2022, and we're going to keep going. From now until people get tired of us, we're going to keep creating infrastructure, FHIR IGs, to make the exchange of information easier and faster. We're member-based. We started off under ONC, but we became member-based. And you can see that all of these organizations are members of us. Number of payers, lots of providers, vendors, everyone is in there. We're always looking for more. So if you'd like to join us, fast@hl7.org is the email address, or just reach out to me directly and I can get you information. So capabilities, like I said, we've developed IGs for National Directory. So a structure that can be used across the country, right up into government, to develop an endpoint directory that goes beyond just saying, hey, this is their FHIR endpoint, but gives you more information about the organization and about what's necessary to connect. We have the security IG. That's why we're here. And I'll let Louis go into that one. We have our digital identity and patient matching, trying to create a transferable digital identity that can be used, and a way of using it as part of matching patients and matching members right across the organization. And our latest one is consent, a way of federating out consent, because right now all of them are single points of contact. Now, as I said, we are a FHIR Accelerator. There are a whole bunch of us, and now more as the devices added into it. I'm going to have to update this slide. And they all work on various aspects of creating fire and making it better. So you have everything from Da Vinci, which people here should be very familiar with, right down to Karen and Codex and Helios and all of those special purpose ones. And underneath it all is us. We created the Fast Security IG with UDAP. We created digital identity, which we're working on getting forward. We're creating more and more things to help get things automated, because every time you can remove human interaction out of a technical standard, you speed things up, you make it easier. And right now you can see it. Our solutions are being adopted by every trust framework in the country. Other SDOs are looking at our standard and saying, hey, we need to include that. We're making a difference because we do infrastructure. We're not sexy, but we get the work done. So basic structure, we have our steering committee. That's payers, providers, vendors, government agencies, and of course, HL7 itself, our executive committee and our project management office, of which I'm the technical director, and the use case leads underneath all of that. Each use case has a project lead. Each project lead works to put together the Fire IG with public input. So let's talk about the projects. Digital identity and patient matching. This takes the idea that we really need to create an identity that works across organizations. Right now, if you want to log into my chart here or any one of a number of places, you have to create an identity that is unique and is not transferable. That slows things down. If I need to get my records from somewhere I haven't used in 10 years, A, I probably don't remember my login credentials, and B, I may never have had them. So I need to have that automated. So we want to establish a set of patient matching and identity management patterns and practices that will work right across the industry and reduce all the variations and all the numbers and all the duplication and allow this to grow. Now, we're not going to talk about contractual obligations. We can't talk about jurisdiction or policy. That's outside what a fire implementation guide is designed to do. But we can make it so that here is a technical structure that can be built around. And that way, we have mediated patient matching, we have transferable identity management that can work throughout an industry. National Healthcare Directory, this is our IG to try to standardize what information is exchanged between payers, providers, government, everywhere. Whether it's an HIE, an EHR vendor, a payer system, any of these, right now what's exchanged is, well, kind of whatever you have in the structure that you have it. This needs to be fixed up so that we can create a golden record somewhere down the line that says this is the organization, this is their endpoints, and this is what they do. That's absolutely necessary. Now, obviously, portal access, creation of a trust framework, application certifications, all these things are way out of scope for us. We just want to create what we call the US core for directories so that everybody can say, hey, this is the basic information. If you want to extend it beyond that, that's great, go ahead. But here's the basic information and structure that can be used. And our latest, as I said, fast consent. Right now, everywhere has a consent repository. They're necessary, both through regulation and for just good practice. But there's one everywhere, and duplicate information, out of sequence information, conflicting information exists all over the place. What we want to do and what we are working towards is develop a Fire IG to outline the exchange and tracking of consent between these repositories so that a patient can have their consent follow them and simply say when they go to a new organization, hey, my consent record is here, go get it. And then those two will remain in sync. So if it's updated at the new place, updated at the old place, or anywhere down the chain. So it can be in 12 different places, but each will know if there's an update, if there's a change. These are not simple things because things like identity of who that patient is, and if they say, hey, I don't want so-and-so having access, who that person is can be a challenge. These are what we're working through, and we'd love your help. Again, what's in scope? New updates, revokes per patient or member request, exchanging consent. We're not going to, though, talk about the consent ceremony, right? How it's created. We're worried about only that once it's created, this is how we exchange it and track it. And of course, policy conflicts between jurisdictions, that's a big deal. But that's, again, way outside what a fire implementation guide should be doing. One thing we are doing and looking at doing is creating a Fire IG about testing. Now, we had the testing and versioning work group for quite a long time, and that has run its course. We're recommissioning it as the Fire at Scale, Testing at Scale work group. There we go. This means taking it from one-on-one testing to being group testing, to have multiple Fire implementation guides, multiple organizations, multiple actors, all testing, chained, so that, and each gets good feedback on what they need to know, from the IG developer to the test engine to the organization doing the testing. These are challenges we're working on. We're just getting started. If you like testing, if you're knowledgeable about it, we'd love to have your help on that. We are looking for people to help lead this project. We just started it this year. We're very excited about it. Okay, and of course, well, the one we're here about. Security for scalable registration, authentication, and authorization. Some people call it UDAP. Some people call it SARA. I call it fast security. I won't go into it in detail because Louis is about to do that. Basically, let's take the humans out of interaction all the way through and setting up registration, authentication, authorization. Let's make it automated. This has been adopted right across the trust framework community. Let's get people set it up, get it in production. This will be really good, and it's going to make security so much better. Again, out of scope, we don't care about endpoint directories. We have an IG for that. Trust policy governance, that's up to the trust framework group. Requirements for architecture, patient provider, patient, none of this in scope. We care about using the UDAP, refining it, and making it so that it goes right across the country and, hey, maybe right around the world. You want to get involved. I know you do. You've all been sitting here thinking, how do I get involved? Well, here you go. We have meetings for all of our groups monthly, usually every other week. So for security, second and fourth Tuesdays of the month, 11 a.m. Eastern time. For our directory, second and fourth Mondays at 3. Public meetings for digital identity and patient matching, first and third Thursdays at 2 Eastern. And of course, fast consent we do on Friday afternoons because everybody likes to talk about consent on Friday afternoons. If you want full details, probably get this to you, or you can go to the HL7 conference call center. It has full details. Just look for FAST under the breakdown. We also have implementer support hours. And this is a big deal. This is something we do to make sure that people can implement these. We get our experts in. That can be Louis, that can be all kinds of people, our tool people, our reference implementation people, all show up to answer whatever questions you have. That's the first Tuesday of each month from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. If you are even just looking at getting one of our IGs implemented, please drop by. You will have questions. We will have answers. So last slide. There we go. If you want to become a member of the Fast Fire Accelerator, we do have a website that's under the HL7 Confluence sites. That's the ID there. Or it's much easier, just to send an email to fast@hl7.org. This will get into the hands of the people that need to. We'll reach out and give you all the information on the benefits of being a member as well as how to become one. We have a FAST project page. We have a FAST LinkedIn group. We have a FAST LinkedIn page. And of course, under the HL7 conference call, we have a FAST list server for sending out emails. If you'd like more information, this is how you do it. And I encourage everyone to do so. We really think that people around the country and in your industry can give us good feedback to make it better. All right, I've talked enough, pretty much talked enough for a lifetime. I'm going to hand it off to Louis. Louis, are you ready?
Sure, Dave. Are you going to be putting up the slides for this? I don't have them on this device.
I will quickly pull them up and we'll get them together.
All right. You can just...
Thank you both. And while you're getting ready to transition, we do have a question we're going to pose to the panel, to all three of you after you go. Louis, thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. So I have, well, looks like about 10 or 12 minutes here to give a whirlwind tour of the security IG. So we can just skip right into some of the meat there, Dave. First slide with some content.
All right.
So as you heard, a lot of the history of the Fire at Scale Task Force and the motivations and the outcomes and pathways. Well, this was one of the first, in fact, I think this was the first implementation guide to come out of that whole process. And that makes sense because you basically need a robust security layer for any of these other use cases to really work. The general construct around this is that it had to be a reusable structure. If we could advance a slide or two, Dave. Let's see if it's moving. We can skip this rehash. The basic idea was, how can we take what people have already started working on in these different APIs, in particular FHIR, which in its primary use is implemented as a RESTful API, and take the work people have been doing in that space, as well as in the National Health Information Network spaces, and bring it together in a scalable, reusable way, so that a new security solution isn't needed every time a new use case comes up. So looking through the discussions that we had over the years and multiple experts that were brought in and discussed the various consequences of things that were underway, we found some common themes centered around the use of OAuth as a common use for the authentication authorization layer together with OIDC. In the RESTful APIs, we found a lot of comfort and confidence in public key infrastructure as a unifying way to bind together actors within a network and provide a way to confirm membership in trusted networks and such. But there wasn't really a working use case out there in the evolving ecosystem that brought these things together in an effective and scalable way. In the review of everything, we basically came around this UDAP solution, which does bridge the gap between OAuth and PKI in an understandable and easily implementable way, so that entities and implementers can reuse as much of their infrastructure as possible and extend it in a way to provide the additional reusable credentials, right? So that we have confidence in who the actors in an ecosystem are, so that we know what data they're able to receive and under what conditions they're asking for it, or what data use policy or purpose of use. You may have heard a lot of these terms. And you may be saying, well, that's not a FHIR problem. That's like any API in healthcare or related to healthcare. And you're right. So I will highlight that although this is the FHIR at Scale Task Force Implementation Guide, it's based on these general API solutions in the UDAP space, the Unified Data Access Profiles. And in fact, anywhere that you're using OAuth or an API key or even mutual TLS, you can replace that with this same reusable framework that you can then have as a unified security management solution for your whole API ecosystem, not just the FHIR ecosystem. So, you know, the items that are out of scope here, things about discovering who the other actors are and things like that, we leave some of this to a concept called the trust community. That's also the entities that are generally deciding on the policy situations, the policy agreements, the data use sharing agreements, things like that, that accompany membership in a community. So some of the major trust communities that exist were up on that slide of FAST members and include entities like the eHealth Exchange and Care Equality, and now the TEFCA network that is nascent and launching in the FHIR space now. So we can go on to the next slide. Again, to highlight the idea is that's highly reusable. The same security framework that an entity that's a member of one of those trust communities is using to interact with its members, just by changing minimal parameters, it can now interact with across to another community using these combinations of components. So the UDAP ecosystem is often displayed as a series of gears. The gears are made up essentially of, here are the 6 major components. One of them at the bottom left relates around registration. This is a key element and one of the first elements. This allows for rapid addition and subtraction of members from a trust community so that they can begin interacting immediately with other trust community members. And the holder of data can rapidly determine whether that member is still in good standing and still eligible to receive data in a more centralized way through the use of public key infrastructure and the associated technologies that come built in with PKI already, such as revocation lists and things like that. Once you've got certificate-based trust like that, you can bring in a lot of the higher security that comes with asymmetric cryptography using JWT-based client authentication, JWT-based authorization assertions, and the such. In fact, the registration is also JWT-based, which is a JSON web token, which is a digitally signed instrument that is passed along from the client to the relying party in a way that the relying party can immediately identify that it hasn't been altered, that it's validly signed, and that the signer is still a member in good standing of the community. And that brings in all the other use cases that I don't have time to cover here, but all of these guides are linked in the slides if you're later interested in pursuing them. If we can go to the next slide. The idea on endpoint discovery in a RESTful API, you're familiar with maybe the OAuth endpoints that are often used with OAuth. There's a way to secure this as well. And this is an important construct, something that's often ignored in API-based ecosystems. We're often very worried about making sure who the client is. But as a client that may be potentially posting health data or providing some PHI as in the necessary means of requesting health data, you also want to be certain who you are posting or communicating with. So the server metadata endpoint discovery allows for an additional signed layer where clients can do the same of servers that servers do of clients, which is, of course, to validate that that's still an actor in good standing in the member community of interest. There's some technical details here around how we achieve that through signing some metadata, which, of course, you can find a lot more information in the published implementation guide. There's a link to that later on in the slides. If we can go on to the next slide. You can skip that. Yeah, trusted dynamic client registration. We've mentioned this already. This basically allows a new member in the community or even an older member in the community that hasn't yet interacted with another party to automate the whole registration API. There are no more developer portals where you go and request client IDs and secrets. This is all automated and scaled up to an asymmetric cryptography standard just through the use of the same certificate used to get membership in the community. After that, everything can be automated. So Dave talked about taking out the humans. Well, we're more front-ending the humans into the whole registration process to get that certificate. So you can have some real experts at validating who the people are, who the organizations are, managing the issuance and life cycle of those certificates. So that if there's ever an issue, some cybersecurity incident, for example, that entity's certificate can be disabled centrally in a way that it rapidly disseminates out and cuts off access at all of the data holders without the compromised entity having to, for example, phone each one by one to say, please turn off my credentials, someone has taken our keys. Right? We don't like that. Instead, we want everything automated. So registration comes hand in hand with the automatic ability to turn entities on and off in a network as well. Next slide, please. Certifications and endorsements allow you to provide additional information about an application that can be used to tailor the types of data that can be achieved. There's more information on this in the guide as well. If we can move on, since we're short on time here. JWT-based client authentication, API keys are out. That is not a secure technology. If you're still using them, you should replace them. Same with client IDs and client secrets. Asymmetric cryptography using RSA or elliptic curve is the way to go now. And that's automatic in the UDAP trust framework. Next slide, please. Business to business authentication. This provides in this guide some additional ability to include some metadata within the transaction around things like purpose of use and actors that have initiated the workflow. Many of you may be using mutual TLS for some of this business to business work, but this doesn't really have the ability to communicate anything else other than the information that's included in the certificate. With the UDAP structure, that's pulled off into the application layer through the inclusion of signed JWTs that can include things such as any additional authorization information that the data holder would need to best decide what data can be shared and under what circumstances. And then by pulling it out to the application layer too, anyone who's managed a gateway or front end load balancer knows mutual TLS is awful when it comes to that. very difficult to keep working right and to make sure everything gets passed through to the actual data holders. Once you pull it into the application layer, that's all automatic too. Next slide, please. There's some examples again. Token requests, also fully automated. This just follows. Once you've got a key registered through a certificate and the certificate identity of the actors, this becomes very straightforward, replaces client secrets. Some examples around some of the advanced use cases that are facilitated. There's something called tiered OAuth, which is essentially kind of a trust community-wide single sign-on. Think about it as a way that a user in one network entity can use their home entity credentials to sign in to another entity's application programming interface using their home credentials, essentially. And it gives the data holder the ability to communicate directly with the identity provider of the home institution to retrieve the necessary information again to maximize what data can be disclosed and under what circumstances, as well as information that may be required for regulatory logging or whatever else as to who exactly was requesting the information at the requesting organization. Next slide. And I'm sorry if I'm speeding through this. I can talk for hours about this, as most people who have heard me speak on this before know. But again, the guide is in its STU2 version already, and there is a lot of detail there that has come from years of collaboration with providers, payers, EHR companies, and the like. Some benefits of tiered OAuth are here. The key thing, essentially, reusable credentials that are network trusted. So you can have one set of high security MFA backed credentials that you can use to access anything on the network. Next slide, please. Just to summarize a lot of this, our goals is this frictionless lifecycle management, app enrollment, app disenrollment, discovery, reusable credentials, all of this with the goal of increasing security, increasing confidence in the ecosystem, by the ability to use PKI-backed authentication and authorization events to reduce the common risks that you might think are currently associated with API environments. There's some more details here for those of you who are interested. I think we're pretty much at the end. Next slide. Just to let you know that that there is some standards alignment here. The goal is that this, as a reusable base layer of security, can be reworked and reused with essentially no new implementation work for a number of different use cases and a number of different communities. And all at once as well. The ecosystem is designed, the UDAP profiles are designed so that the data holders have complete control over the data that they're willing to release, given knowledge of the memberships of the actors that are trying to request it. So here are some examples of some of the organizations that have made implementation guides already that are based on this common framework of security, and I'm sure there will be more in the future. Anything else?
No, that's it, Louis.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. For all of our speakers, and thank you, Louis, as well, for tying that back to us in one of our next discussions now is back to the HIPAA security NPRM as we turn the table. Before we do that, though, I'm glad that you just kind of brought back for us. You covered a lot of technical terms, a lot of details as you discussed the dynamic registration and authentication. I just wanted to remind everybody, this reminds me of many years ago when EDI we were all discussing EDI, and you had the business people that said, we need a way to do a bill. And you had the technical people that would sit in the room together and tear apart the implementation guides. I think we still have a little bit of that, and we're very thankful for those of you who will do that implementation guide work. And we also need to bring it back to the business people to be able to say, so what's going on with our industry? So I wanted to pose to all three of you on the panel. We've been a long time working on these things, and it's wonderful to see the progress. And I know that it's out there. I know that it's attainable, as all of us do. I continue to go to my doctor and have them tell me I have to sign paper forms or they won't talk to the other doctor. And I'm wondering where we are in the industry and what is the biggest problem. So I'm posing to all three of you, just kind of elevator speech, what is the biggest problem? What is our biggest problem with getting this thing brought up by our entire industry and having everybody do it? So I'm going to go in order. Lee, I'll go back to you first, please.
The biggest problem I think that we're trying to deal with, what we've got, unfortunately, there's more than one, Leslie, but I think that the issue that, you know, we're trying to implement, for example, interoperability. We're trying to get interoperability in place. I do think that interoperability, and we're talking about whether or not it's the FAST initiative, whether or not it's what Sequoia is doing, whether or not, you know, with TEFCA. I mean, we've got a lot of initiatives, and I use today the model that if I get rolled into an emergency room in California and I'm unconscious, that attending physician is going to do everything they possibly can to make me as comfortable as possible. But if they can't get my EHR, which in many cases they probably can't, because we don't have the interoperable environment that we're trying to get to, then they're going to try to make me as comfortable as possible. Mortality goes up. Take that same thing, if we continue to implement interoperability in all the aspects that we're talking about, from a secure exchange using FHIR, UDAP, all the aspects that we're talking about. Take that same example, 3 years from now, I get rolled in, you know, unconscious, and they can take out my wallet, and that individual can key in my driver's license number, and it pulls all of these QHINs and all of these areas in a secure way to be able to get my EHR in front of that attending physician. Now, mortality goes down. That when we start to get to it, it's being able to connect all the dots here. But when you look at that, we add a lot of different connection points, and so we increase the overall risk from a cyber aspect as well that we also need to address when we're looking at all this. So these are all there's a lot of different factors here, but I think those are some of the key ones that we're trying to address.
Thanks, Lee. David, your thoughts?
Lee's absolutely right. There's a lot more than one key issue. We're trying to do ours, right? We have a way of getting endpoints. We have the security, we have identifier, but what we don't have is the regulatory and legislative frameworks that really make it possible. For consent alone, right? You have HIPAA is a wonderful thing. It has done so much to bring forward privacy and security for every patient and member out there. But it's also making it slow it down, because everybody's now afraid of the massive fines that HIPAA can bring. We don't have a push to say, hey, we need to move the modern frameworks. As somebody mentioned in the chat, the fast security IG was part of the proposed HTI 2, and if HTIs 3 through 5 come out, which will be part of the original NPRM, you will see that fast security is part of them, but we're waiting. So as we move this all forward, it's been really, really good, but we still need to make sure that the frameworks are there and that it's shown that the cost benefits are there. So everybody's sitting there going, hey, it's going to take me so much to do this. I'm going to get these benefits, but revenue streams, all of these things need to be taken into account. And we're still at the early days of doing that. Interoperability is a wonderful thing, but it will impact the way a company works. So really need to move that forward, get the CMS, get ASTP, get everybody involved, get WEDI involved to facilitate these discussions and get this all moving forward so that we can say, hey, we know what's going to happen once we get all this exchange going on. And suddenly members and patients can have a much better life when they walk in with Lee into the emergency room and take out his appendix and his wallet.
I see Janice in the chats talking about the importance of the cultural aspect of it as well. Louis, would you like to comment?
I think that Lee and Dave have really kind of hit on the key points here. I do think that implementation may take some time, but if you look towards something like the FHIR at Scale Task Force Security Solution, if not something more general in the UDAP family, these were designed to be very easy to implement. And to reuse a lot of existing infrastructure, and then provide you a forward reusable technology as well. So I think, you know, in as much as this will be hard to implement is sometimes put up as a barrier, I would say back that most organizations already have the necessary expertise, either in the PKI or OAuth space, to start working on this, looking at this. And you know, what we've found with members that come and participate in our working groups is once they start seeing this, they're like, why didn't I know about this sooner? You know, although it's all just a combination of existing pieces, it just comes together in a way to facilitate a lot of the other issues that, or to reduce the importance of some of the other barriers by, you know, making it possible to implement a bunch of policy constructs within a single security framework.
Mm-hmm.
And
Thank you.
Leslie, can I just
Please.
wanted to say that, you know, what Janice was talking about on the cultural aspects here as a barrier is very real, and that will take time. I think the only way we're going to address some of these cultural barriers is the more use cases, the more successes that we have, and people start to see the successes and start to see the benefits, it starts to help to break down the cultural barriers, but it's going to take time for that to also be addressed.
Well, my other question, and please, everybody, forgive me for asking this, it's such a naive question, but you know, I'm certainly aware of the CMS patient access rules and the push for the government program side to be able to start doing some uptake on these things. That's certainly moving and helping us move the dial forward or move the needle forward, as Lee always says. But what's happening in the commercial space? I mean, isn't that a nut to crack that would really help this move along? Is it? Does anybody know?
Absolutely. And there's a lot in the commercial space going on. I mean, that's the whole Da Vinci Fire Accelerator's job, is to work with the payer community, work with the provider community to find how to exchange the information, find out what information will help get these things going, and to set it up in a way that is standardized, so you're not ending up with $50,000 every time you hook up a new hospital, right? Every time, new provider, new payer, you do it through CDA. Literally, I've been told $50,000-$60,000 just to hook up one. In fire, it's under 10, because suddenly you have a well-advanced knowledge of what you're going to get, and then you just have to tailor your workflows around that. So absolutely, and it's starting, right? You're starting to see uptake. You're seeing the Trebuchet initiative to try to get, you know, payers and providers exchanging. You're seeing so many initiatives out there to get things moving, and it's really heartwarming to see. I mean, as an old geek, anytime I see interoperability moving forward, my heart gets warmer, or maybe my blood pressure goes up, one of the two. And I think that's where it's going. It's still early, right? Not everybody's signed up, not everybody's going, but it is happening.
I think you and I said earlier this week when we bumped into each other, maybe 5% of the industry so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But still,
that's a start.
it is absolutely a start. It's wonderful to see. It's a secure, scalable way to move forward. Thanks to everyone for all of your hard work in this area and presenting to us today. I'd like to encourage those on the call. Please do continue if you have other questions. We will coordinate those with our presenters. So thanks, everyone. And Lee and David and Louis, thank you again for your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Leslie.
So, Rob, would you like to introduce this next component? I think we're going to be talking through the NPRM and doing a recap from our member position advisory meeting earlier this month.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie, and let me extend my appreciation to Elliot, Dr. Mayers, Lee, David, and Louis. Really fantastic discussion of what we all know is such an important topic. But it's my pleasure to start the final session here. We're going to do a little bit of a dive into the OCR Notice of Proposed Rulemaking entitled HIPAA Security Rule Notice of Proposed Rulemaking to Strengthen Cybersecurity for Electronic Protected Health Information. If you go to the next slide, please. So just for those that aren't overly familiar with the rule, it came out in the Federal Register on January 6th of this year. We've put a link to the NPRM. The comments are due to OCR by March 7th, so that's coming up pretty quickly. And as Leslie said, WEDI held a member position advisory event, or MPA, last week to bring the industry together, WEDI members, to discuss the NPRM and really try to come up with some consensus agreement around what WEDI should say in our comment letter back to OCR. So again, it was really a dynamic an exciting event, really a deep dive into the rule, and it was great to hear various perspectives from the different stakeholder groups. As you can imagine, there's no timeline for any additional government action. For example, it could come out as an interim final rule with comment or as a final rule. And with the new political environment, there is the potential for this rule to be withdrawn by the new administration. I will say my colleague, Michael McNutt, and I had the opportunity to speak earlier this week with Tim Noonan, who is the deputy director at OCR. And he said that everything is in flux, but as of earlier this week, the NPRM still is out there, and they're going to accept comments until the 7th. But you know, things can change, so just keep watching the news for that. So with that, we can go to the next slide, and I wanted to turn it over to the co-chairs of the WEDI Privacy and Security Workgroup, Leslie and Tan Tien. Thanks so much for your leadership and for your expertise.
Thank you. Tantia, did you want to begin, and we can do comments as we go, if that works with you?
Right. So I'm also watching the clock to make sure that we hit on the high points or even the pain points of what's being proposed here. In terms of this is what the OCR has projected the anticipated cost for implementation of all the revision being proposed to HIPAA security rule. It's going to be 9 billion, even with the number you see in the first year, 9 billion, and year 2 to year 5, 6 billion. Words on the street across all industry stakeholders, this is hugely an underestimate, and we agree. That's why in terms of part of our MPA review last week, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of good in being proposed, but not everything should be in the final rule, because it does, and it would impose unnecessary administrative burden and cost to the covered entity. Next slide.
Some of the other, just real quick, if you don't mind, the other things to point out about this, I've been intrigued in that there is obviously, as the NPRM provides background as to how and why they make some of these statements, and buried within this is that they really believe our covered entity employer group health plan groups, our employer health plan sponsors are needing to become compliant. I just wanted to call that out. I think it's a whole niche area that obviously we've all been doing implementation of the HIPAA security rule for decades. And it's interesting that they're calling that out and pointing it out. And the second thing was, I felt that their reasoning, I know the dollar number is high, but their reasoning was that if we can get these controls implemented and we can shore up our healthcare data exchange space, we should have less breaches. So I know, I think some of our comments were that we kind of applaud that fact that you're helping us get there, but the dollar amount, as you mentioned, Tantien, is huge. And I've also heard consistently from everyone that it's just, it's too prescriptive and too far.
Yep.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, so I think here's when we're going into general provision, and then later on, very shortly, a number of specific controlled, or they call it implementation specifications to be compliant with. So to strengthen the security rule standards and implementation specification, new proposal for I mean, I think these are expected. Requiring written documentation of all security rule, policy, procedures, plan, and analysis. I think as an auditor, if you don't have your policies written down, just even if you are following the best practices, actually you're not doing anything because you have nothing to compare against. They update quite a number of definitions and also adding new terms as well and revising some of the IS to reflect changes in the technology and terminology. And they also add specific compliance time period for many existing requirements. So across all of this, we would say it's a sort of a nice to have, but in terms of execution, our comment would be to allow for that flexible approach and not be too prescriptive with specific timeline and time frame to deliver on things.
Right. And Tantian, if you don't mind, I wanted to zero in on the request for the written documentation. You know, as we've all mentioned, this is in the initial HIPAA security rule, and we all preach, have your written policies and procedures and continue to revise them and make sure that they reflect your business model. I was surprised. I mentioned to some of you, I had attended an industry conference earlier this week and listened to some presentations. And even though in our MPA, I think everybody agreed, yes, you need written documentation, I did hear some provider representatives saying, oh, that's just more paperwork. It's administrative burden and we don't need that or want that. And I was just actually myself as an auditor shocked to hear that. But I wanted to call it out because I think we're going to find that across our industry, people are going to come all over the board on some of these things. Do you both agree that we had good consensus that written documentation is agreed upon? We need to have it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
for sure.
Okay. Next slide, please. I think this is the one that's, would I would say anything, it is the one thing that OCR wanted to confirm that their guidance, their requirement versus addressable implementation specification, they make it very clear there is not an option to not do this. All of the requirements are, as I say, required. What they make it more tolerable is it allows for a flexible approach in how you will implement these controls. So the what is confirmed is a must. It's in the how that is the flexible approach that you can carry out.
Mhm.
Okay.
Next slide.
I'll take a crack at this first, Leslie. So the rule goes through, again, the general provision. Here we're getting into the detailed requirement in that you are familiar with HIPAA security looks at a set of control for administrative safeguards, physical safeguards, and technical safeguards. And actually the requirement to have written technology asset inventory and well-documented network map falls in the administrative safeguard. And it's calling for not only the regulated entity, you need to have your technology asset inventory, but that must also cover the asset inventory of your business associates. If the EPHI flows into that BA's environment, you need to pull that into your technology asset inventory as well. Likewise, with a network map, covering both regulated entity and the BA, wherever there's the entry and the exit of that EPHI data point.
Yeah, and maybe just to make a comment here. What was interesting during the MPA was we heard from some folks that these are really new concepts, in particular the network mapping. And I think one of the comments that we're going to make is to encourage OCR to develop some resource materials, some education, some examples. So in particular, smaller organizations can meet this requirement without necessarily having to go out to outside consultants and incur the cost.
And Rob, I don't know if we made consensus on it, but I know we had discussions about the naming of this. Because, I think our technically minded people immediately think about an asset inventory because those are the words they used. But I believe that from a business perspective, we're talking about some of OCR's guidance in years past about understand where all of your EPHI is, understand how you create it, how you receive it, how you maintain it, how you transmit it, and show it in this diagram. And that was how I took it. And I know that's probably a different perspective, Tan Tien, than how you took it. And I think that's why we were all, just kind of the asset inventory network map sounds so technical. And I know we're talking about our technical environment housing the data, but this is more about the data and where it is and how it is created, received, maintained, transmitted. And so anyhow, we had a lot of discussion about that. So Janice is saying, well, that's the network map. The asset inventory is a list of stuff. Yes. Different things technically, I understand. But my point is, I don't want people to look at this and say, oh, we're talking an asset inventory and a network map. Those are very technical documents that we're used to seeing. I believe they're talking about the data and where and how it flows through them. And that's my point. I think it's a different perspective, Janice, on the ask from the way that they quoted and discussed it in the NPRM and went back and looked at their previous guidances on those. So I know they just say network map, and that's why I think that's an important part. Rob, we may want to go back and revisit that if others feel that way. I'd love to see, do others on the call have comments in this area?
While we're waiting, I think it's fair for us to say this is somewhat unclear and it needs to be explicitly stated in any final rule. But I see Chuck.
Hello, Chuck Verwerk, Kunstler and Associates. I think having worked with the compliance and the security documentation required of a small firm, that the text often suggests that the organization look for any weaknesses or points of potential exposure or other areas where if some effort were invested, the safety and security of the EPHI could be improved. And if you take that kind of a perspective, then an asset inventory includes not just devices, but software products, tools, the cloud, your people, your list of credentials that individuals use in order to access these various software products and tools. And if you take that step forward and don't limit your thinking to just devices or the network, you are going to be far, far ahead if it comes down to an audit scenario or an investigation, perhaps, hopefully not, of a breach, because you will have at your hands the necessary information for running down what may have happened or where the weaknesses were exploited, and then can build a stronger protection around that in the future, even if you have suffered a breach.
Very well said. And I think my concern with the terminology, the definition terminology as it is I'm afraid, just like we've seen in some of the other HIPAA security requirements, that industries and organizations will take them and say, hey, you technical people take care of that. You business people take care of that. You compliance legal take care of that. And this takes everybody. And I think that's what's so near and dear to my heart. But well said. And the comments in the chat, thanks to Susan Clark as well, who went back to the definition, said it's including all those things, the technical assets themselves, the data, and as Chuck put it, it's everything that you want to protect. Thank you. Any other comments? I know people are posting in chat. We appreciate that. The thoroughness helps us and it helps us as well.
Just add one last comment on this, and you will see the linkage later on in a few slides. This is actually the beginning of your process in doing risk analysis, which is a long overdue and maybe overlooked component of the HIPAA security rule, the cause of many of the security breach that OCR received.
Excellent point, Tanti. I know we're going to talk about how it's talking about even those systems supporting the PHI that may not have PHI on them, making it enterprise-wide. So excellent point. Okay, I think we're good on this one. Thank you.
Ah,
Oh, there we go. Movement of the data throughout the systems.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the important one here is this network map must be done at least once every year. So it's not a once and done. It's a continuous process.
And in response to every time there's a change to the environment that would obviously introduce some new component. And
Yep.
Chuck has a note there, but having to update the inventory for every version change of software that is necessary for the device could be quite a bit overhead. Yes, I agree. I think all this is still, that's why it's so important we continue to say that this is all risk-based. You make the decisions based on the threats as to what level you need to go. And that still allows us to be, a shop of 5 people that's a group health plan handling data, or a huge organization. You make different choices. And I know you've got the at least annually, and then in response to a change, and then you're going to have to figure out what is a change, what is a significant change, and that's part of your compliance, is to make those decisions.
Well, I think we discussed in the MPA last week that the requirement for reviewing the specific one and all the written policies as well, at least once every 12 months, and that's overly burdensome, because there's also another standard called the evaluation, which is part of your change management process. You need to be reviewing the risk and the threats to your EPHI whenever you do any of those development and the change control process. So if that's built in there, and if you're responding to any change in the environment, if you're merging, there's acquisition, or you're changing your technology platform, you're doing that holistically. There isn't really that need to require, oh, I also have to review it once every 12 months. So flexibility approach, if OCR, if you really mean for us to have that flexible approach, let it be risk-based, the security maturity of the organization, and there are other compensating standards in existence.
Okay, ready for next one? There we go.
Oh, we already addressed this.
Part of the risk analysis, and it's the use to create, receive, maintain, transmit the data. Now you do, as you brought up, Tantien, also as it relates to a business associate, and the way I envision this, especially in a smaller organization, is when they sit down to do their risk analysis and begin with the development of how the data moves around, they need to be identifying their business partners, who are, I just call them downstream entities, those who are handling PHI on their behalf. And that's what you're talking about. They need to have an understanding of how that's being impacted as they handle data back and forth between them. It really kind of begins this push to say, it's not just about you, entity, who is subject to this. It's about how your data is moving between you and your others. It's really kind of pushing us there from an industry perspective. Reminds me, Rob, as you talk about training and doing contingency planning and pushing that out a little more to our stakeholders.
Yeah, and this is not surprising that they've really zeroed in on business associates and that relationship with the covered entity, because apparently that was sort of the cause of the major breach now about a year ago. And you have to hand it. Government doesn't always move quickly, but OCR did move fairly rapidly to produce this rule. Although we may have concerns with it, I think they recognized with this breach that it could dramatically impact the delivery of healthcare. And so they're taking these steps. Now, we'll, of course, try to mitigate some of the administrative burden, but overall, I think there's a consensus around the need to ensure that this data is protected.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Yeah, so enhancing existing safeguard, and I think these speak specifically to the technical safeguard expected to make sure that you're instituting a vulnerability scanning at least every 6 months and a penetration testing by qualified personnel at least once every 12 months. Now, certain organizations already have automated vulnerability scanning running persistently. So that might not be a big lift, but for organizations that have not the resources to do those, that could be a high call, and they're requiring that. And then, of course, calling for penetration testing once every year. And again, penetration testing can be done in two ways. Announced, meaning the team that does does the cybersecurity defense for the organization is informed in advance, or only leadership knows that there's a ethical hacker engaged to do penetration testing unbeknownst to the cyber team. It does speak to the requirement for organization to think about how they will go about going in compliant to become compliant with this requirement. I think implementing and strengthening network segmentation is one of the industry best practice for cybersecurity control. You need to segment your network so that in order to secure those, so that if there's a threat, a hacker gets in, you immediately can corral where they have entered and close it down and prevent the spread of the ability of that bad actor going across your network. And then, of course, the third one is reviewing and testing the effectiveness of certain security measure once every 12 months. And maintaining documentation of that testing of the effectiveness, that could become an administrative burden and require additional costs for the organization to meet that requirement to review and test the effectiveness of the control.
At the same time, if something happens in between and they have a breach, doing this seems so much more proactive and easier to accommodate than to have that kind of an issue occur. I think we had discussion as well talking about these technical changes or suggestions in two areas. I had mentioned that given the whole cybersecurity, the issues we had last year and some of the best practices we're seeing now, I was shocked that they didn't talk about whitelisting. And we didn't see it anywhere in the language. And I was also surprised they didn't add more on systems development lifecycle, the importance of having the change control processes in place. They did talk a little bit about change control, but I was really expecting to see a whole lot more around that. I don't know if we added that. I also wanted to share, obviously I wear two hats. My WEDI hat is here, but as my hat as an assessor for Direct Trust, as we were looking at this, we've heard across the industry and from our customers, obviously people have said, this is so prescriptive. Why are you going to be so prescriptive? That's part of the problem with this new language. At the same time, at Direct Trust, in our accreditation area, we've had recommendations that are prescriptive on the best practices side for a while. So, for example, we see organizations doing endpoint monitoring in real time most of the time. So we were very much struggling with how do you come in and provide the allowance that organizations can use their own risk-based custom way of figuring out how they're going to do things and at what level and what makes sense for them from a cost and complexity perspective, but also raise the bar of the floor. And so I think that's how we also settled on the at least 12 months. We'd like to see it more current from a best practice perspective, more frequent. And same thing, the reviewing of the controls and the physical and technical access controls. Well, this should all be part of the risk analysis on an ongoing basis anyway, right? As you mentioned, Tantian, you should be on an ongoing basis evaluating your entire your system and your sets of controls. And so once every 12 months, and I think that language is in there just as is everywhere else, or when there's significant change to your environment. So
if I can, I think the one word that was very prevalent in the 2005 security rule that is noticeably absent here is the word scalable. And that came up a lot during the MPA. Of course, we had dental practices represented in our facilitators. And if you think about a dental practice that has very little technical expertise, you hand them these lists of requirements. The worry is that they simply can't afford it. They're running on very slim margins. So I think it's still important to recognize that not all organizations have the same ability to conduct things like network segmentation.
Okay. Next slide, please.
We've
That's
been
like
talking about
your
this,
baby.
haven't we? Yeah, I think we've already very much addressed this. This is all part of the risk analysis. I think we all very much agreed to it, that it's just part of the process.
Yeah. I think too, when you review the enforcement actions published by OCR, almost all of them reference the fact that the risk analysis was either not done at all or not done to the level that was expected. So I think they're really trying to hammer home here that the risk analysis is the foundation for the entire compliance exercise.
Yep.
Is there another slide that's talking about this
Yes.
concept of making sure you're looking at your full enterprise?
Yeah, I think
We talked a little bit on it earlier. I don't know if it's documented here, but it's something that I spent a lot of time internally with my organization. We talked about was that when you're first doing your analysis, to do a complete analysis of how you can best protect your data, you're not just looking at what's in what we've been calling your network, your asset inventory and your network map. You're also looking at the systems that support those systems potentially. I think that was really important from a scoping perspective, that, you know, it's a broad-based enterprise look to decide where you put your controls. Yep, this is what you were mentioning, Rob, how OCR has consistently said they're not doing a full risk analysis, or it's just not complete enough. And so at least on an annual basis. Contingency response. We had some discussion in the MPA on this one. Specifically, we talked a little bit about how there already is a requirement in the HIPAA security rule that when you are getting ready to prepare for incident response and disaster recovery and disaster planning, you need to understand your criticality and applicability of all your data and your applications, et cetera, across your information. You basically, to put it very plain and simple, you need to know what comes back up first based on its criticality if you have a negative event. And so we were talking about how we're starting to see from a best practice perspective, organizations develop the top 3 to 5 playbooks. So if you have a security incident, it's well documented. Who do I call? Why? When? It might be different for one type of an issue versus another. We talked about that, and I think the issues having to do with this, we definitely supported testing and revising these response plans, because you see and heard just today with both of our speakers about how fast everything is changing around us. Our various threats are changing on a daily basis.
And I wonder if it's on the next slide that there's an additional requirement that the contingency plan, is part of that contingency plan. The regulated entity ought to be bringing up their critical systems within 72 hours. And if we recall back to the Change Healthcare event, that has a domino effect. I mean, everyone has a different starting point. I mean, is 72-hour a reasonable time constraint to bring your critical systems back up? So I think part of our discussion last week in the MPA was it should be brought up according to the risk structure of the organization. They may have different, what's the word? Different scales of these are my, as Leslie had mentioned, these are my top 3 system that has to come back, you know what, within the hour, not even within 72 hours. And then the different scaling of based on risk and based on resources, bringing back other systems.
Did we come to a decision on the hours there, Rob? I know we said it should be risk-based. We'd like to see from best practice that it's much sooner. And I thought we considered even 48 hours. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
think the challenge here is when does the clock start? Because if an entity has been hit, um, it may take them a long time to figure out what has been hit, what has happened. And I think we heard during the MPA that meeting that 72 hours might be a challenge. I thought, we heard from folks that creating an internal plan and making sure that that plan was compliant, I think was better than trying to assign a specific number of hours.
Okay, thank you. I know we switched to this next one. This was the one that's talking about having to revoke access of a workforce member. There were two components to it. It was revoke the access of a workforce member within 1 hour, or as soon as possible, but no later than 1 hour. And then there's also a downstream here that talks about notifying business partners within 24 hours. And I believe we had a lot of pushback on these timelines.
Yeah. Again, I think if in this case, it's probably a lot easier if it's a small organization that is nimble, but a large organization may have a very complex protocol that 1 hour might not be able to be met.
Well, and don't forget the systems that have to sync up to allow for the termination to be effective that may take overnight, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think we also, though, did talk about there still should be the risk base. You have a bad actor, you need to get them out fast. You should be able to do that as immediately. You know, that should be what your goal is as soon as you absolutely can, but not be prescribed to a certain number of minutes or hours.
Yep, agree. Next slide, please.
There we
Uh,
go. It's on it.
I think this one is probably the most contentious, that requires regulated entity to conduct a compliance audit every year. And they did not specify that you must have independent auditor, but just conduct a compliance audit. And we found this is a pretty tough call and resource constrained administrative burden on the regulated entity with everything else that we have to do. So, and especially if you have you feel that you have a mature cybersecurity infrastructure and all the controls established, and all your monitoring processes are at work, this should not be required every year, and perhaps it could be every 2 to 3 years, based on your cybersecurity maturity.
We didn't talk about this at the MPA, but both the High Trust has basically a 2-year period. The interim year, there is a semi look at the information. It's called an interim. It's maybe 15% of the workload that you'd have the first year. And I know with our accreditations at Direct Trust, they are valid for a 2-year period to be able to allow just for a lessening of the burden. But also, I would still expect to see an organization update their policies and procedures at least annually, probably take a look at their risk analysis documentation annually. So, I think it's as you said, Tantian, it's the burden of having people come in and disrupt your everyday business to do the audit is the problem here.
Exactly.
And the cost.
Right, right.
Okay. Next slide, please.
We mentioned this about having to notify business associates. Well, this part was regarding the contingency plan activation. And I think I had pretty positive feedback on this. I don't know if we agreed to the 24 hours, but we said this is one that we should support, that there should be a fast notification, if you will.
Yeah, especially since the covered entity might need to take action, and the faster they hear about the issue, perhaps the more they can mitigate the downstream impact of it. And again, I think, OCR is looking at what happened a year ago and saying, what steps can we require to lessen the potential of this happening again?
And I think a lot of our participants in the MPA also said we already have these kinds of requirements in our contracts.
Yeah, yeah.
But well, I think that certain group may think the 24-hour is time limiting, because if you're in the midst of reacting to an incident and you're already activating your contingency plan, having, someone to go and notify all the business associate, a lot of covered entities have many they themselves is a regulated entity, and they themselves are also a business associate to someone else. And that's a reporting requirement added on top of everything they're doing in the midst of a quote unquote a crisis. And so we did discuss, I agree with you, Leslie, that in the contractual agreement, there are already reporting agreement between the covered entity and the business associate. Let that be, driving that, instead of adding you must notify within 24-hour. And also, I know that in the regulation, the proposed rule says with the notify your covered entity without unreasonable delay. So we thought the combination of the existing agreement between, the business associate agreement and the addition of the proposed rule of without unreasonable delay was sufficient, without that within 24-hour on top of that.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. Next slide, please. That deploys it.
Well, this is the notification that the business associate needs to confirm with the covered entity at least once every 12 months that their technical safeguards are in place. And this was a written analysis of their relevant electronic information systems by a subject matter expert, and a written certification. The analysis was performed and is accurate. I know we had a lot of discussion on this. I know we're concerned in a couple of areas. We're concerned about this being burdensome because of the timeline on it. We were concerned about BA having to share their specific confidential information, and could a third party perhaps, or an accreditation or certification be used? I think those were all the things we discussed regarding this topic. I'm not sure how we ended up with it. Do you know, Rob?
I don't think we arrived at a consensus, but I think the idea is if there are alternative ways to meet the goal, for example, through certification, that would be preferable from having this extra subject matter expert come in and certify. That may be something we can avoid.
Yeah, that second bullet point is problematic.
Yeah.
It's invasive.
Well, at the same time, we see a lot of organizations doing, I'm just going to call them vendor report cards on those BAs with whom they share data, and they'll look at them on an annual basis. Now, I know I'm talking about your larger companies that are complex and have resources in place. But it is a shame that everybody has to look at everybody else all the time. And I know a lot of the discussion in the MPA was if we could have one standard at which people could be measured and then share that as, hey, I've been vetted today. I've been vetted this year. You don't need to do anything but take this certification or document or whatever, and you can trust me that is something that we need to address in our industry.
Well, I mean, just something, and I forgot, Rob, if we discussed this, but for PCI accreditation or PCI compliance, the company can go in, using the PCI platform to do their own self-attestation that I've done this and this and this. It's quite rigorous, and although it's not legally binding, it's sort of your reputation's on the line once you've done that self-attestation on the PCI SSD platform. Once you submit it to them. So I wonder if that is something OCR would be open to, opening up a HIPAA self-attestation on the OCR webpage, which is, a regulatory agency and not just your own self-attestation.
Yeah, very interesting. And then your your downstream business associates or covered entities could point to that and say, I'm going to trust them because they've at least they've attested themselves. Yeah, very interesting.
Next slide.
I think none of us had any concerns with the requirement that EPHI at rest and in transit be encrypted. I know the language is in there. There could be limited exceptions, and we would expect those would be risk-based and documented and monitored, just like everything else should be. So I think
Yeah.
there wasn't much feedback on that one.
Yeah. I mean, I think we feel this is already industry standard. It's actually in the implementation of the requirement, it's to what level? Because if you talk about encryption, you can talk about encryption at the application layer, the database layer, the server layer, because anything that contains the ePHI data within should be encrypted and protected.
I also think we talked about how, particularly on these technical controls, there are other good reference points, such as the 866 and other NIST documents regarding encryption and other things we can look at too for assistance in this area. I see Christopher Graken has a question. What's extraneous software? Like on a phone, how does one remove all that the phone company loaded? I know I typically thinking about our technical systems, and please people chime in, but I know I'll be looking for an ongoing monitoring of software to make sure it's up to date and used, and when it is not, it is to be disabled or removed. And I kind of think that's a catch-all phrase there for that. Tantien, do you want to add?
Yeah, in an organization, there's usually a list of approved software that could be deployed on the company's asset, technology asset, our laptop, um our phone, our iPhone and stuff. It's approved. We cannot load anything ourselves, and it used typically go through, it's a support group that loads the software for us.
So that's the importance of the monitoring. What we're saying, Janice, a lot less normal for smaller orgs. You mean something unusual for them to do? Yes. Yes. Everything we look at, when you take a look at a very small entity that doesn't have any IT expertise in-house, you can see these things are challenging. Okay. I go to the next one. Oh, using the MFA with limited exceptions again. I think everybody agreed to that. We talked about the vulnerability scanning. We've already covered that and the network segmentation. I think we covered it on previous slides.
Yeah, and I think the number 6 speaks to part of your disaster business continuity and disaster recovery plan is you need to have processes in place to identify your critical systems and backing up the data, and in terms of backing up how far based on the critical nature. I mean, if something like our electronic health record, you probably are backing up every hour and maintaining exact copies of that. So the proposed rule here spells out very detailed requirement for the backup of ePHI data and testing that the backup was done correctly as well. And then, of course, it requires the regulated entity to review and test these controls every 12 months to make sure that if and when you do trigger your disaster recovery plan, it will work as intended.
Okay. Oh, my favorite topic these days. I think it's just because it's an area that I think as an industry we may not have spent a lot of time on, and we should probably do this across WEDI as well. And I've spent a lot of time helping employer group health plans implement policies and procedures for HIPAA privacy and security. And I've typically found that it's literally a small team in the HR area that has, a few people that really have access to data. And yet, apparently, they've really been called out on this thing as needing to become compliant. So obviously, we have all the same kinds of concerns that you have when you're working with a small provider or the dental group. You know, you have to figure out where the data is, and you've got to get your controls implemented and deal with a whole different set of people once you figure out your scope. So I just like to call this out, as I think it's a whole area we may want to start to do some work in our work group on.
Right. Well, I think just specifically to this requirement, it's requiring the group health plan to make sure that their plan sponsor comply with the administrative, physical, and technical safeguard of the rule, and et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how everyone feel, but we feel that we just need to be able to make sure that we have communicated the HIPAA requirement to the plan sponsor, but we cannot be held accountable for making sure that they comply with that.
Well, I think what happens here is, and it all depends, it's also wrapped up with ERISA rules, but based on the size of the entity, the organizations, if they are self-funded, can be responsible as an employer group health plan themselves. And I think that's part of the confusion of all of it, as whether or not they have to implement these. So I really think, Rob, we should take this one and maybe see what we can discuss further, deep dive as a group. Certainly with respect to our NPRM responses, we have to decide, you know, how we want to respond. But I think this is a whole area we want to dive into.
Yeah, definitely.
Same issue there about notifying on the contingency plans within 24 hours. Okay.
And I'll just say here that the NPRM included around 30 or so questions, almost like a request for information more so than a proposal. So it was sort of an RFI built into the end of the NPRM. So we pulled out a few of the questions, but there are plenty of others to review.
I don't have any comments on these areas. I mean, I think, like you said, we were discussing these during the MPA. And I don't want to jump ahead. I'm interested into where we are on the draft of this, et cetera, and when people can expect to see something to look at as a result of our MPA. But I don't want to jump ahead. I know we still have to finish some of this content, Rob.
Yeah, we can skip through these questions, Michael, if you want to move ahead. So I think, yeah, I think at least
I
one
think we've
more.
covered those.
Yep. So I think so the way that we develop these comment letters is we'll have a draft and it'll go to you two as the co-chairs. And then you'll have a chance to review it. We also allow the board a chance, and we've got some real experts on the board, and they have, you know, in their organizations, they traditionally circulate it, and we get feedback from those organizations as well. And then once we've got a final draft, we get a final approval from the board, and then we submit it. Assuming the regulation is still in the Federal Register and hasn't been pulled, then we'll submit it.
Thank
And
you.
I
And then
did,
at that point, it's public. Everybody can
correct.
take a look at it then. I gotcha.
Yes, yeah, and I did want to give you two a last opportunity to discuss the work group and let folks know that if they're interested in joining the work group, or if they have colleagues in their organization, this is an opportunity to get involved.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob. And I know Tantien covered this a little bit in the beginning. We do meet monthly, and we really try to provide a safe place to talk about all these items and issues. And we're constantly doing things like bringing in expert speakers and also trying to tackle some of our industry issues with practical ways to handle them. Some of the documents we've recently sent out, like our top 10 cybersecurity tips, et cetera. So please do consider working with us. We understand you have day jobs, as we all do too, and we like to share the load and do something good for our industry, and it usually benefits our organizations as well along the way. Tantien?
No, I echo what you have just said, Leslie, and you know, the more the merrier. Forgive me, you know, I would have to ask Ariane Interrupt, has our work group membership grown? I think we have, but you know, please come join us and be a part of this group. We want to ensure that communication is two-way. It's not just Leslie, Rob, and Michael and I pushing information to you, but you know, this is a community of we're all peers, we're colleagues. We suffer if you have a pain point in security and privacy issue in your organization, definitely likely more than one of us are also having that pain point. And it's good to be able to discuss solutions because as we react to policies and regulations coming down from the federal and state, likewise, we could be advocate and to help shape and mold that final rules and regulation, as we are doing now for the NPRM.
Right. We had a number of people after our meetings last week that asked how they could join. And so again, a reminder, it's a poll for Ariana Poll's email at WEDI.org, and she'll get you set up. And then from there, you'll just meet with us monthly. So we appreciate your time and interest today. And I guess back to Rob or Michael to close.
Yeah, just I'll turn it over to Michael to talk about the upcoming events that we have planned. And thank you both again.
Thank you, Rob. And all these events can be found on our website, WEDI.org, and simply click on events. The next phase of data innovation might be moved, actually. After that, we have Exploring Genomic Data Exchange, part 2 of our 5-part series on the CMS 0057 implementation updates. Emerging technology work group event, distributed streaming for healthcare ecosystem interoperability, a lot more. Plus, in May, our spring conference, we will have a track dedicated to cyber resilience, where we hope we see you, and we hope to have several of our speakers who are here today and at our past events. So on behalf of WEDI, I'd like to thank all of you for attending. And once again, slides and recordings will be sent post-event. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone.